The barn doors exploded open, slamming against frozen wood as wind screamed through the January darkness. Martha Hale staggered into the snow, her left hand twisted at an impossible angle, blood dripping black onto white ground. Behind her, 3 ranch hands stood silhouetted against lamplight, their faces twisted with rage. "Thief!" one shouted. She fell to her knees, breath clouding the air. Caleb Turner ran from the house, boots crunching ice, and caught her before she hit the ground. Her whisper cut through the chaos. "They broke it, but I'm not done cooking." Before we continue, drop a comment with your city so I can see how far Martha's story travels. And if this opening grabbed you, hit that like button. You're in for a journey. The winter of 1885 didn't arrive gently in Wyoming territory. It came like a fist through glass, sudden, violent, and unforgiving. By mid-January, the cold had teeth that bit through wool and leather, through barn walls and optimism, straight down to the bone. At Turner Ranch, 12 miles south of a town too small to deserve a name, the snow had piled so high against the bunkhouse that the windows disappeared entirely. The cattle, what remained of them, huddled in the lee of windbreaks, their breath rising in desperate clouds. Caleb Turner stood at the kitchen window of the main house, watching dawn break gray and reluctant over the eastern ridges. He was 29 years old, though the past 6 months had carved lines around his eyes that made him look older. Tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and a jaw perpetually tight with worry, he pressed his forehead against the cold glass and tried to remember what hope felt like. His father had died in August. Heart gave out while mending fence, just stopped, dropped the hammer, and fell forward into the sage. They'd buried him on a hill overlooking the valley, and Caleb had inherited not just the ranch, but a mountain of debt the old man had never mentioned. $3,000 owed to the territorial bank. Notes scattered across his father's desk like accusations. The banker, a thin-lipped man named Horace Grimm, had given Caleb until spring to pay or forfeit the land. Spring felt like a cruel joke when winter was trying to kill everything that moved. "Coffee's ready." The voice came from behind him, quiet and steady. Caleb turned to see Martha Hale setting a pot on the table, steam rising in lazy spirals. She moved carefully, favoring her right side, her left hand wrapped in clean white cloth that was already showing spots of red. "You shouldn't be up," Caleb said. "Doc Morrison said you need rest." "Doc Morrison says a lot of things." Martha poured coffee into 2 tin cups with her good hand, her movements precise despite the obvious pain. "Most of them involve me sitting still while the world falls apart. I've never been much good at that." She was 62, though she'd probably subtract 5 years if anyone asked directly. Her hair was silver, pulled back in a tight bun that accentuated the fine bones of her face. She'd arrived at Turner Ranch in late September, walking up the road with a canvas bag and an offer, room and board in exchange for cooking. Caleb had been skeptical. The ranch was failing, supplies were tight, but something in her eyes, a kind of quiet determination, had made him say yes. Best decision he'd made in months, maybe years. Martha's cooking had transformed the bunkhouse from a place of sullen silence into something almost human again. The ranch hands, 7 men who'd watched their wages shrink and their futures dim, had started smiling at meals, started talking. The beef stew she made could resurrect a dead man's appetite. Her biscuits were legendary. Even Wade Brandt, the foreman who complained about everything from the weather to the color of the sky, had softened slightly under the influence of her cornbread. But that was before the supplies ran low, before hunger made men suspicious, before everything went to hell in a handbasket. Caleb accepted the coffee and sat down at the scarred wooden table his grandfather had built. "Tell me what happened." "The real version." Martha eased herself into the chair across from him, cradling her bandaged hand against her chest. Outside, the wind moaned around the corners of the house. "I've been feeding people," she said simply. "I know that. You've been feeding the crew." "Not just the crew." She met his eyes without flinching. "Travelers. Families passing through. Anyone who looked hungry." Caleb felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Martha, I know what you're going to say. Supplies are short. Winter's hard. We can barely feed ourselves." She straightened her spine. "But I've seen hard winters before, Caleb. I've seen what happens when people start thinking only about themselves. It's a sickness worse than any fever." "How long?" "Since November. Maybe 20 people. Families mostly. One woman with 3 children, her husband had died of pneumonia 2 weeks prior. An old man walking to his daughter's place in Montana, feet wrapped in burlap. A couple, couldn't have been more than 18, heading west with nothing but faith and foolishness. She paused. I gave them what I could, bread, dried meat, sometimes just a hot meal and a place to sleep in the barn. And the crew found out. Martha's jaw tightened. Wade found out, last night. He'd been watching me, I think, suspicious, counting supplies in his head like a miser counts coins. He followed me to the barn after supper. I was packing food for a family camped about a mile down the creek. Father, mother, 2 little girls. They'd lost their wagon in a crossing 3 days back, saved themselves, but lost everything else. She fell silent, her good hand curling into a fist on the table. Caleb waited. After a long moment, she continued, her voice quieter now. Wade came through the door like a thunderstorm, started shouting about thieves and charity cases and how I was stealing food from honest men's mouths. I tried to explain, tried to tell him there was enough, that I'd been careful. She stopped, swallowed hard. He grabbed the sack out of my hands. I tried to get it back. That's when he caught my wrist and twisted. The sound, she didn't describe the sound, but Caleb could imagine it. The snap of bone. Martha's sharp intake of breath. The terrible moment of pain that made the world go white. Then Garrett and Cole came in, Martha said. They'd heard the shouting. Wade told them I'd been robbing the supplies, said I was feeding strangers while the crew went without. They believed him. She looked down at her wrapped hand. Or maybe they just wanted to believe him. It's easier to be angry at someone when you're scared and hungry. Caleb stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Where is Wade now? Probably in the bunkhouse telling everyone what a villain I am. Martha's voice held no bitterness, which somehow made it worse. Don't do anything foolish, Caleb. This ranch is barely holding together. You start fighting your own foreman. He broke your hand. Yes. That's not something I can ignore. I'm not asking you to ignore it. I'm asking you to think. She stood too, moving around the table to face him. Wade's been with your family for 15 years. The other men respect him. You're young, you're unproven in their eyes, and you're in debt up to your eyebrows. You pick a fight with Wade over me, a woman who's been here all of 4 months, and you might lose more than the argument. She was right. Caleb hated that she was right, but she was. The ranch was a fragile thing, held together by routine and the thin hope that somehow they'd make it through to spring. Wade Brandt was the spine of the operation. He knew every acre, every head of cattle, every fence post that needed mending. The crew followed him because he was competent and confident and had been there since Caleb was still learning to ride. But he'd broken an old woman's hand in anger. What do you want me to do? Caleb asked finally. Martha studied him for a long moment, her gray eyes sharp. I want you to decide what kind of man you are, what kind of ranch this is going to be, because right now it's at a crossroads. You can let fear and suspicion rule, or you can choose something different. Easy for you to say. Nothing about this is easy. She turned toward the stove, began checking the pot of oatmeal warming there. But I've lived long enough to know that the hard choices are the ones that matter. The easy ones just delay the inevitable. Before Caleb could respond, boots stomped on the porch outside. The door swung open, bringing a blast of cold air and Wade Brandt's considerable presence. The foreman was in his mid-40s, built like a bull, with a thick beard and eyes the color of creek ice. Behind him came Garrett Mills and Cole Hayworth, 2 of the younger ranch hands, both looking uncertain. Wade pulled off his hat, snow tumbling from the brim, but his expression remained hard. We need to talk. I'd say we do. Caleb kept his voice level. You want to explain why Martha's hand is broken? You want to explain why she's been giving away food while we're rationing meals? Wade shot back. Found the evidence myself. Sacks of flour, dried beef, beans, all packed up nice for strangers. We're down to beans and hardtack while she's playing Lady Bountiful. Garrett shifted uncomfortably. He was barely 20, red-haired and freckled, and he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Boss, we didn't know about the hand. Wade said she was taking supplies. I didn't say anything about breaking bones, Wade interrupted, but there was something defensive in his tone. She grabbed at the sack, I pulled it back, things got out of hand. It was an accident. An accident? Caleb let the words hang in the air. You accidentally broke a woman's wrist. I was trying to stop a thief. I'm not a thief. Martha spoke quietly from the stove, not turning around. I've cooked every meal for this crew since September. I've stretched every ounce of flour, every scrap of meat. Not one man has gone hungry on my watch. The food I gave away was surplus, carefully managed, and I kept exact accounts. Surplus? Wade barked a laugh. There's no such thing as surplus in January. Every bite matters. Every person matters, Martha corrected, finally turning to face him. Or have we forgotten that? The kitchen fell silent except for the bubble of oatmeal and the wind outside. Caleb watched the three men, saw the conflict playing across their faces. Wade's anger was real, but underneath it was fear. Fear of hunger, of failure, of a winter that seemed endless. Garrett and Cole just looked tired and cold and caught between loyalties they didn't fully understand. Here's what's going to happen, Caleb said slowly, choosing each word with care. Wade, you're going to apologize to Martha. Then you're going to help me inventory the supplies, all of them, so we know exactly where we stand. If we're truly short, we'll ration properly. If there's enough, we'll continue as we have been. Wade's jaw worked. And the stranger she's been feeding? That's between Martha and me. Not your concern. Everything on this ranch is my concern. Wade's voice rose. Your father trusted me to keep this place running, and I won't watch it fall apart because you're soft on careful. The word came out sharp as broken glass. Caleb took a step forward. Whatever you're about to say, think hard about whether you want those to be your last words as foreman of this ranch. The threat landed like a physical blow. Wade's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. The air between them crackled with tension. Behind Wade, Garrett and Cole looked ready to bolt. Finally, Wade turned to Martha. The apology, when it came, sounded like he was chewing nails. I'm sorry about your hand. Didn't mean for it to happen that way. Martha nodded once, accepting without comment. Good. Caleb grabbed his coat from the peg by the door. Let's go check those supplies. Martha, you rest that hand. Breakfast can wait. Breakfast will be ready when you get back, she said firmly. A broken hand doesn't make me useless. As Caleb led the three men out into the brutal cold, he caught Wade's expression, still angry, still resentful, but now laced with something else. Uncertainty, maybe, or the first crack in the armor of his convictions. The barn was a cathedral of shadows and frozen breath. The inventory took 2 hours. They counted sacks of flour and beans, weighed dried beef, checked the root cellar where potatoes and carrots sat in careful rows. Caleb kept the tally while Wade watched in stony silence. The numbers told a complicated story. Supplies were lower than they should be, but not catastrophically so. Martha's accounting had been meticulous. She'd kept a small notebook documenting every portion given away, every meal served, every mouth fed. By Caleb's calculation, they had enough to make it to March, maybe early April if they were careful. See, Wade said when they finished, we're on a knife's edge, can't afford charity. We've got 6 weeks minimum, Caleb countered. And the hands are working harder because they're eating better. Martha's meals have kept morale from collapsing completely. You know that's worth something. Wade was quiet for a moment, his breath clouding in the lamplight. Then, your father would have sent her packing. Maybe. Or maybe he would have trusted that feeding hungry people doesn't make us weak. It makes us human. Caleb closed the notebook. Either way, he's not here to decide. I am. They walked back to the house in silence. The sun had risen fully now, a pale disk behind thick clouds. The wind had died down slightly, but the cold was relentless, the kind that made your lungs ache with each breath. Inside, the kitchen smelled like coffee and oatmeal and something else. Bread, fresh and warm, the kind of miracle that defied the frozen world outside. Martha had somehow managed to bake with one hand. The loaves sat cooling on the counter, golden and perfect. The crew was already gathering for breakfast, drawn by hunger and habit. 7 men in total, including Wade, Garrett, and Cole, plus Frank Morrison, no relation to the doctor, Pete Alvarez, Tom Kershaw, and old Sam Hutchins, who'd been working ranches since before most of them were born. They filled the kitchen with the smell of cold and leather and unwashed wool, taking their usual places at the long table. Martha served with quiet efficiency, Her bandaged hand held close while her right did the work of two. Oatmeal with a precious spoonful of honey. Fresh bread with butter that had been churned just yesterday. Coffee strong enough to wake the dead. No one spoke. The tension from earlier still hung in the air like smoke. It was Sam who broke the silence. The old man set down his spoon and looked at Martha. "Heard about your hand. That true, Wade? You break it?" Wade didn't look up from his bowl. "Was an accident." Accidents happen when men get careless or angry. Sam's voice was mild, but there was steel underneath. "Known you a long time, Wade. Seen you angry before. Never seen you break an old woman's bones over it. She was giving away food." "I heard that part too." Sam cut him off. "Also heard she kept records. Managed supplies better than we've seen in years. Heard the family she was helping last night had 2 little girls, younger than my granddaughters." He paused. "What I'm wondering is when we got so small that feeding hungry children became a crime." Garrett nodded slowly. "My ma used to say that what you give comes back threefold. Might not be food, might be something else, but it comes back." "Superstition," Wade muttered. "Maybe." Garrett shrugged. "But I've been eating better since Martha got here than I did all last winter, and I've seen her ration her own portions to make sure we had enough. That's not stealing, that's the opposite." One by one, the other men voiced agreement. Even Pete Alvarez, who rarely spoke at all, gave a small nod. The tide was turning, and Wade felt it. His face darkened, but he kept eating, each spoonful deliberate and angry. Martha watched it all without expression, though Caleb thought he saw the smallest hint of relief in her eyes. Then Tom Kershaw, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. "What about tonight? Those families Martha's been helping, some of them are still out there, still hungry. We just going to pretend they don't exist?" "We're barely getting by ourselves," Wade said flatly. "Are we, though?" Tom gestured at his bowl. "This is the best meal I've had in months. We've got enough. For now, winter's not over." Winter's never over for some people. This from Cole, surprising everyone. The young man flushed but continued. "My family lost everything in a drought 5 years back. Strangers fed us, kept us alive until we could get back on our feet. If they'd counted every bean and turned us away, I wouldn't be here." The words settled over the table like snow. Wade stared at his bowl, jaw working. Finally, he stood abruptly, chair scraping. "Fine. Feed whoever you want. But when we run out, don't come crying to me." He walked out, leaving his half-finished breakfast behind. The remaining men exchanged glances. Sam sighed. "He'll come around. Wade's a good man underneath all that bluster. Just scared like the rest of us." "Fear makes men do ugly things," Martha said quietly. She was standing by the stove, her bandaged hand resting against her apron. "But it also gives them a choice, to let the fear rule them or to be bigger than it." After breakfast, Caleb helped Martha with the dishes despite her protests. They worked in comfortable silence, the kitchen slowly emptying as the men headed out to their morning tasks. Through the window, Caleb could see them spreading across the ranch, checking fences, tending cattle, the endless work that kept a place like this alive. "You handled that well," Martha said eventually. "Didn't feel like it. Because it wasn't easy. The right thing rarely is." She handed him a wet plate. "Your father was a good man, Caleb, but he was hard, practical to a fault. He believed in taking care of his own and letting the rest of the world fend for itself. And you don't? I believe there's no such thing as your own and the rest. There's just people, all of us trying to survive, all of us deserving of dignity." She paused, her good hand stilling on the edge of the sink. "I had a husband once, a daughter, lost them both to fever in the span of a week 30 years ago. For a long time after, I thought the world was cruel and random, and caring about anyone beyond yourself was foolishness." "What changed?" Martha smiled, sad and distant. "A stranger fed me when I was starving. Didn't ask my name, didn't want anything in return. Just saw someone hungry and offered bread. It was such a small thing. But it reminded me that kindness still exists, that we have a choice every day about what kind of people we want to be." She dried her hand on her apron and looked at him directly. "This ranch is dying, Caleb. You know it, I know it, the men know it. The debt, the weather, the cattle, it's all pressing down like a stone. But you've got a choice. You can spend your last months hoarding and suspicious, or you can go down being the kind of place that feeds hungry children. Only one of those options lets you sleep at night. Before Caleb could respond, the door burst open. Frank Morrison stumbled in, face flushed with cold and exertion. "Fire!" he shouted. "Fire in the east pasture!" The world tilted. Caleb ran. Behind him, Martha's voice called out, but he was already through the door, boots pounding frozen ground. Smoke rose black against the gray sky, visible even from the house. By the time he reached the scene, half the crew was already there, beating at flames with blankets and coats, shouting over the roar. The fire had started in the dry grass near the tree line and was spreading fast despite the snow. The wind had picked up again, pushing the flames toward the fence that separated the pasture from the main grazing area. If it jumped that fence, if it reached the winter grass they'd saved for the cattle. Wade was in the thick of it, his face streaked with soot, bellowing orders. "Get water! Wet down the fence line! Move!" They fought for an hour. It felt like a year. The cold meant nothing. Caleb's hands went numb, his lungs burned from smoke and exertion, his eyes streamed tears. They beat the flames back inch by inch, soaked the ground, stamped out embers that tried to jump the gap. Finally, it was out. The damage was contained to about an acre of pasture, the fence singed but intact. The men stood in the blackened snow, breathing hard, covered in ash and sweat despite the freezing temperature. "How did it start?" Caleb asked when he could speak. Wade pointed to a spot near the tree line. Even from a distance, the evidence was clear. Someone had built a small pile of kindling and dry grass, sheltered from the snow by an overhang of rock. It had been deliberate. "Arson," Pete Alvarez said quietly. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Wade turned slowly to face the group, his expression dark. "Those families Martha's been feeding, they know this ranch, know where we keep supplies, where the pastures are. One of them came back." "You don't know that," Caleb said immediately. "Who else? We haven't had strangers here in weeks except the ones she invited. We don't know anything yet." But even as he said it, doubt crept in. The fire had been set deliberately, that much was obvious. And the timing, right after the confrontation about the supplies, felt too coincidental. They walked back to the house in grim silence. The crew dispersed to clean up and change clothes, but Wade followed Caleb inside. Martha was at the table, her face pale. "Someone tried to burn us out," Wade said without preamble. "Set a fire in the east pasture. Deliberate." Martha's good hand went to her throat. "Was anyone hurt?" "No, but that's not the point." Wade's voice was hard. "The point is that your charity has consequences. You feed strangers, you tell them about this place, and then they come back to rob or sabotage us. This is what happens when you trust the wrong people." "You don't know who set that fire," Caleb said sharply. "I know enough. And I know we can't afford to keep taking risks." Wade turned to Martha. "No more feeding outsiders, not one scrap. If you can't abide by that, you're done here." "That's not your decision to make," Caleb said. "Then make it yourself." Wade's control finally snapped. "You're so busy trying to be noble that you can't see we're sinking. The debt, the weather, now sabotage. We're hanging by a thread. And you want to keep playing the generous host?" "I want to keep being human. Human doesn't pay the bank. Human doesn't survive the winter." Wade's face was red now, veins standing out in his neck. "Your father understood that. He'd be ashamed to see you throwing everything away over sentiment." The words landed like a punch. Caleb felt something crack inside him, some final restraint. He stepped forward, close enough that Wade had to look up slightly. "My father is dead. This is my ranch now, and if you can't respect that—" "Boys," Martha's voice cut through the anger like a knife. Both men turned to look at her. She was standing now, her gray eyes fierce. "This isn't helping. Someone set that fire, and standing here shouting won't tell us who. We need to think." "There's nothing to think about," Wade said stubbornly. "There's always something to think about." Martha moved to the window, looking out at the scorched pasture in the distance. "The fire was set deliberately, you said. How close to the road?" Caleb frowned. "About 50 yards. Why?" "Because anyone who knows this ranch would know that lighting a fire there in this wind would be seen immediately. Would be easy to put out before it caused real damage." She turned back to them. "If someone wanted to truly hurt this place, They'd have chosen a different spot, somewhere hidden, somewhere the fire could spread before anyone noticed. Wade opened his mouth, closed it. It almost feels like, Martha paused, thinking, like whoever said it wanted it to be noticed, wanted it to be stopped. A warning? Caleb asked slowly. Or a distraction? Or a test? She shook her head. I don't know, but I don't think it was the families I've been feeding. They were desperate, yes, but not angry, not vengeful. They were grateful. Gratitude can turn sour when people are hungry enough, Wade muttered, but he sounded less certain. Before anyone could respond, hoofbeats sounded outside. Caleb looked through the window to see a rider approaching, a boy, maybe 14, on a horse too big for him. The kid dismounted and ran to the door, pounding urgently. Caleb opened it. The boy's face was red from cold and fear. Mr. Turner? My pa sent me. We're camped down by the creek, about a mile east. Someone came through our camp last night, tried to steal our supplies. When my pa chased him off, the man said this ranch would burn. Said you were harboring criminals and you'd get what was coming. The kitchen went silent. What did the man look like? Wade demanded. Tall, thin, had a scar across his cheek here. The boy traced a line from his ear to his mouth. Rode a gray horse with a white blaze. Pa wanted you to know in case he came back. Caleb and Wade exchanged glances. Neither of them had seen anyone matching that description. But the implication was clear. The fire hadn't been set by the grateful families Martha had helped. It had been set by someone with a grudge. Thank your father for the warning, Caleb said, pressing a few coins into the boy's hand. And tell him to be careful. If this man comes back, don't confront him. Just get somewhere safe. After the boy left, the three of them stood in the kitchen, the weight of this new information settling over them. Wade looked shaken, his earlier certainty crumbling. I was wrong, he said finally, the words clearly painful. About the families, about... He didn't finish, but Martha nodded understanding. So someone's targeting the ranch, Caleb said. Someone who knows enough to threaten, to set fires. Someone with a scar and a gray horse. And a grudge, Wade added. But over what? Who have we angered? The question hung unanswered. Outside, the winter day continued its slow, cold progression. The fire was out, the immediate danger past, but something worse had replaced it. Uncertainty, the knowledge that somewhere out there, someone wished them harm. Martha returned to the stove, her broken hand cradled against her chest. I'll make lunch, she said quietly. Whatever's coming, we'll face it better on full stomachs. And as she began to work, one-handed but determined, Caleb understood something fundamental. This ranch was indeed at a crossroads, but the choice wasn't just about feeding strangers or hoarding supplies. It was about what they would become in the face of fear, whether they would let it make them small and suspicious, or whether they would hold on to the fragile, difficult belief that doing right mattered, even when the world seemed determined to punish them for it. The answer to that question would determine everything. Lunch was a quiet affair, the men chewing in contemplative silence while Martha moved between stove and table with practiced efficiency. Her bandaged hand had stopped bleeding, but Caleb noticed how carefully she kept it elevated, how she winced when she forgot and tried to use it. The bread she'd baked that morning disappeared quickly, torn into chunks and used to sop up the last of the bean soup. Outside, clouds had moved in thick and low, promising more snow by nightfall. Wade ate slowly, his earlier fury replaced by something harder to read. Guilt, maybe. Or just exhaustion. When he finished, he pushed his bowl away and cleared his throat. I'll ride out this afternoon. Check the fence lines, see if there's any other damage we missed. Could be our friend with the scar left other surprises. Take Garrett with you, Caleb said, and both of you carry rifles. I don't want anyone out there alone until we know what we're dealing with. Agreed. Wade stood, then hesitated. He looked at Martha, opened his mouth, closed it. Finally, the bread was good. Thank you. It wasn't much, but coming from Wade, it was something close to a peace offering. Martha nodded and Wade headed out, calling for Garrett as he went. The afternoon crawled by. Caleb spent it in his father's old office, a cramped room off the main hall that smelled of pipe tobacco and old leather. The desk was still covered with his father's papers, Bills, receipts, letters from the bank that grew increasingly insistent. Caleb had been avoiding this room, avoiding the full weight of what he'd inherited. But the fire had shaken something loose in him. If someone was targeting the ranch, he needed to understand exactly how vulnerable they were. The numbers were worse than he'd thought. His father had been borrowing against future cattle sales for years, always believing the next season would be better, always one step ahead of disaster until suddenly he wasn't. The $3,000 owed to the bank was just the visible peak of a much larger problem. There were debts to feed suppliers, equipment merchants, even the blacksmith in town. All told, Turner Ranch owed nearly $5,000, and the assets, cattle, land, buildings, might fetch half that if sold under pressure. Caleb sat back in the chair, feeling the weight of it pressed down on his shoulders. His father had always seemed so confident, so in control. Now Caleb understood it had been an act, a desperate juggling routine that had finally failed. A knock at the door pulled him from the darkness of his thoughts. Martha entered carrying a cup of coffee, the steam rising like a small prayer. "Thought you could use this. How did you know I was in here?" "You get a certain look when you're carrying the whole world. Saw it on your father, too." She set the cup on the desk, her eyes scanning the scattered papers. "Bad?" "Worse than bad." Caleb gestured at the mess. "Even if we make it through winter, I don't see how we make it through spring. The bank wants payment by April. We'd have to sell everything and still come up short." Martha pulled up the other chair, settling into it with a soft sigh. "Your father was a proud man. Probably couldn't bring himself to tell you how deep the hole went." "He should have. Maybe I could have helped. Could have—" Caleb stopped, realizing how foolish that sounded. What could he have done? He'd been working the ranch alongside his father, but the old man had kept the books close, had made all the decisions about money and debt. "Pride is a poison," Martha said quietly. "I've seen it kill more dreams than any drought or hard winter. Makes men think asking for help is weakness, that admitting struggle is failure." She reached out with her good hand and touched one of the letters from the bank. "But it's never too late to choose a different path." "What path?" "We're cornered." "Maybe. Or maybe we're just looking at it wrong." She leaned back, her eyes distant. "I told you I lost my husband and daughter. What I didn't tell you was what came after. I spent 2 years angry at the world, closed off, working jobs that paid barely enough to survive. Then one winter I found myself in a town in Colorado, broke and starving, and a woman I'd never met invited me into her home. Fed me, let me stay, asked nothing in return." Caleb waited, sensing she needed to tell this at her own pace. "I asked her why. Why help a stranger? And she said something I've never forgotten. She said, 'Because the only thing we really own is what we give away. Everything else can be taken.'" Martha's voice was soft but steady. "That woman taught me to cook, helped me find work, gave me a reason to keep living. And when I left that town, I promised myself I'd do the same for others, that I'd give away what I could because that was the only wealth that mattered." "That's a beautiful story, Martha, but it doesn't pay the bank." "Doesn't it?" She smiled slightly. "You've been thinking about this ranch as something you own, something you have to protect and defend. What if you thought about it differently? What if it's not about holding on, but about what you do with it while you have it?" Before Caleb could respond, the sound of horses approaching pulled them both to their feet. Through the window, they could see Wade and Garrett returning, but they weren't alone. 3 riders accompanied them. No, 4. As they drew closer, Caleb recognized the family Martha had packed food for the night before. The father, a lean man in his 30s with worry lines carved deep around his eyes, sat his horse carefully. Behind him, his wife held their 2 daughters, both wrapped in a single blanket. Caleb and Martha met them at the door. The temperature had dropped even further, and the first flakes of new snow were beginning to fall. "Mr. Turner?" The man dismounted stiffly. "Name's Jacob Pierce. Your foreman said you'd want to hear what I have to say." "Come inside, get warm." Caleb held the door open as the family filed in, the 2 little girls wide-eyed and silent. Martha immediately moved to the stove, pouring hot coffee for the adults and warming milk for the children. Jacob Pierce stood in the middle of the kitchen, hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable. His wife, a small woman with determined eyes, kept the girls close. Wade and Garrett remained near the door, snow melting off their coats. "I heard about the fire," Jacob said. "Heard someone's been threatening this place. I think I know who." Every eye in the room fixed on him. "Man came through our camp 3 nights ago. Before you helped us, ma'am," he nodded to Martha. "Said he was looking for work, but something about him didn't sit right. Had a scar, like my boy described. Rode a gray horse. When I told him we didn't have any work to offer, he got mean. Started talking about how ranchers in this territory were all the same, greedy, selfish, hoarding wealth, while good people starved." "Did he mention Turner Ranch specifically?" Caleb asked. "Not at first, but the next morning, after we'd moved on and camped closer to your creek, he came back. This time, he asked direct questions. How many men worked here? Where were the supply buildings? Was the owner young or old?" Jacob's jaw tightened. "I didn't tell him anything. Sent him on his way. But then that woman there," he gestured to Martha, "she brought us food and kindness when we needed it most. And when my boy came back from warning you about the fire, I knew I had to tell you the rest." "What rest?" Wade asked sharply. "The man said he wasn't alone. Said he had friends, men who'd lost everything to ranchers and banks, and were looking to even the score. He called it justice." Jacob's voice dropped. He said Turner Ranch was going to be an example. That when they were done, everyone in the territory would know what happens to people who turn their backs on the desperate. The words fell into the kitchen like stones into still water, the ripples spreading outward into silence. Finally, Martha spoke. "How many friends?" "He didn't say. Could be 2, could be 20, but he seemed confident, like he had numbers on his side." Caleb felt the walls closing in. First the debt, then the fire, now this, a threat not just to property, but to lives. He looked at Wade, saw his own fear reflected back. The foreman's earlier anger seemed almost quaint now, a luxury from a simpler problem. "Thank you for telling us," Caleb said. "You didn't have to ride back here. Risk yourself and your family." Jacob's wife spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but firm. "That food Miss Martha gave us? It saved our lives. We've been on the road for 6 weeks, lost everything we owned. People have passed us by, looked right through us like we were ghosts. She saw us. She helped us." She paused. "We don't have much, but we have honor. We pay our debts." The 2 little girls, identical twins with dark hair and solemn faces, pressed closer to their mother. Martha crouched down to their level, her bandaged hand forgotten. "What are your names?" "I'm Sarah," said one. "She's Rebecca." "Those are beautiful names. Would you girls like some cookies? I baked them yesterday." The transformation was immediate. The girls' faces lit up, and they looked to their mother for permission. At her nod, they followed Martha to the counter where she'd stored a tin of sugar cookies, carefully rationed but still plentiful enough to share. Jacob watched his daughters eat with an expression that broke Caleb's heart, joy and pain mixed together, the terrible gratitude of a father who couldn't provide. "We should go. Don't want to be caught out here when that storm hits full." "You'll do no such thing," Martha said firmly. "It's nearly dark, snow's coming down hard, and those girls need a warm place to sleep. You'll stay in the barn tonight. It's not much, but it's dry, and we've got enough hay to make proper beds." "We couldn't impose—" "It's not an imposition, it's sense." Martha's tone left no room for argument. "Besides, if there's going to be trouble, we could use another man who knows how to handle himself." Jacob looked at Caleb, who nodded. "She's right. And frankly, the more people here, the less likely this man with the scar will try something. There's safety in numbers." The decision made, the evening took on a strange quality of forced normalcy. Martha prepared dinner, venison stew that she'd been saving for a special occasion, though what made this evening special was hard to define. Perhaps it was the simple fact that they were alive, together, facing down fear with hot food and human company. The crew ate in shifts, some men staying on watch while others filled their bellies and warmed their bones. Sam Hutchins took a particular shine to the Pierce girls, telling them elaborate stories about his days as a cowboy in Texas, most of them probably exaggerated, but all of them entertaining. The girls giggled, their earlier solemnity forgotten, and their laughter was a bright sound in the heavy atmosphere. After dinner, Caleb stood on the porch watching the snow fall. It was coming down thick now, big flakes that caught the lamplight from the windows and turned the world into something soft and muffled. Beautiful, if you forgot how deadly it could be. Wade joined him, rifle in hand. I've got Tom and Pete on first watch, Frank and Cole taking second shift. Rest of us will be ready if anything happens. You think he'll come tonight? Hard to say. Storm like this provides cover, but it also makes quick escape harder. If I was planning something, I'd wait for clearer weather. Wade paused. But desperate men don't always think straight. They stood in silence, watching the darkness beyond the circle of light from the house. Finally, Wade said, I was wrong this morning, about a lot of things. You were scared. That's no excuse for breaking an old woman's hand. Wade's voice was rough with something that might have been shame. Your father always said fear was just information, not instructions. Should have remembered that. He also said a lot of things about keeping to ourselves, not trusting outsiders. Caleb glanced at the foreman. Maybe he was wrong about that. Wade considered this, then gave a slow nod. Maybe. Or maybe times have changed. What worked 20 years ago doesn't work now. He shifted the rifle to his other shoulder. That family in there, Pierce and his wife and those little girls, they could have just taken the food and disappeared. Could have decided the warning wasn't their problem. But they came back. That means something. It does. Makes a man think. Wade cleared his throat. Makes a man think about what kind of place this is. What kind of place he wants it to be. Before Caleb could respond, a shout came from the barn. Both men were running before the echo faded, boots pounding through fresh snow. Other members of the crew poured out of the bunkhouse, rifles ready, and Martha appeared in the doorway of the main house with a lantern held high. Tom Kershaw stood outside the barn, breathing hard. Someone's been here. Cut the lock on the tack room. Caleb's heart hammered as they pushed inside. The barn was a cavern of shadows and nervous horses. The tack room door hung open, its new lock severed cleanly. Inside, saddles and bridles lay scattered, but nothing appeared to be missing. What the hell? Wade moved through the chaos, checking inventory. They didn't take anything? Maybe we interrupted them, Tom suggested. But Caleb noticed something else. A piece of paper nailed to the wall, crude letters scratched in what looked like charcoal. The hungry don't forget. The hungry don't forgive. The message hung there like a curse. Martha, who'd followed despite Caleb's protests, read it with narrowed eyes. He's trying to frighten us. It's working, Garrett muttered. No, Martha's voice was sharp. Fear is what he wants. Fear makes people irrational, makes them turn on each other, makes them abandon principles. We give him that. We've lost before the real fight even starts. Easy to say when you're not the one standing watch in the dark, Wade said, but there was no heat in it. I'll take a watch shift, Martha replied calmly. Broken hand or not, I can hold a rifle well enough to raise an alarm. Nobody's asking you to. I'm not asking permission. She turned to Caleb. What are you going to do? It was the question, wasn't it? The one that mattered. Caleb looked at the message on the wall, at the scattered tack, at the faces of his men, scared, angry, waiting for direction. He thought about his father, about the debt, about the impossible mathematics of survival. And he thought about Martha's words earlier. The only thing we really own is what we give away. We're not running, he said slowly, and we're not changing who we are because some man with a grudge wants to terrorize us. We keep doing what we've been doing. We feed people who need feeding. We help where we can. And we defend this place if we have to. That's suicide, Wade said flatly. Maybe, but the alternative is becoming the kind of people who let fear make us cruel. I won't do that. Caleb met the foreman's eyes. My father built this ranch through hard work and stubbornness. But maybe he also built it on some choices I'm not proud of. Maybe there were people he could have helped and didn't. Maybe he could have been more than just a survivor. He turned to address all of them, his voice carrying in the cold barn air. I know the ranch is failing. I know we're in debt that might swallow us whole. But however much time we have left, I want to spend it being the kind of place where a hungry family gets fed, where strangers find shelter, where doing right matters more than just surviving. If that's suicide, then at least we'll die with our souls intact. The silence that followed was profound. Then Sam Hutchins, leaning on his rifle like a cane, chuckled softly. Hell of a speech, son. Your father would have hated every word. He smiled. I like it. One by one, the other men nodded. Even Wade, after a long moment, gave a grudging dip of his head. All right. We do this your way, but we do it smart. Double watches, weapons close, nobody alone. And if this man and his friends show up looking for a fight, we give them one they won't forget. The decision made, they secured the barn and posted guards. The snow continued to fall, muffling sound and softening edges, turning the ranch into something from a dream or a nightmare, depending on your perspective. Caleb walked Martha back to the house, both of them moving carefully through the deepening drifts. Inside, the kitchen was warm, the fire in the stove casting orange light across the worn floorboards. The Pierce family was already bedded down in the barn, the girls asleep between their parents in a nest of hay and borrowed blankets. You meant what you said out there, Martha observed. It wasn't a question. I did. It won't be easy. People will call you foolish. They already do. Let them. Caleb poured himself coffee from the pot Martha had left warming. I'm tired of trying to be what everyone expects. My father's son, the practical rancher, the man who makes hard choices. Maybe it's time to make a different kind of hard choice. Martha smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked truly pleased. You're going to lose the ranch, you know. The debt's too deep, the situation too far gone. Even if this man with the scar disappeared tomorrow, the bank will still come calling in April. I know. But what you do between now and then, that's what matters. That's what people will remember. They sat together in comfortable silence, drinking coffee and listening to the wind outside. The house creaked and settled, the sounds of an old building weathering another storm. Somewhere in the bunkhouse, men talked in low voices, keeping each other awake and alert. In the barn, the Pierce family slept the exhausted sleep of people who'd been running too long and finally found a moment's rest. And somewhere out in the darkness, a man with a scar and a gray horse was planning whatever came next. The night passed without further incident. When dawn broke gray and cold, the ranch was buried under 8 inches of fresh snow. The beauty of it was almost offensive, everything pristine and white, like the world had been scrubbed clean of sin and memory. Caleb stood at the kitchen window, watching the crew emerge from the bunkhouse and begin the morning routine. Feed the horses. Check the cattle. Break ice on the water troughs. The endless work of keeping things alive. Martha was already cooking, her movements showing the toll of a sleepless night, but her determination undiminished. She'd wrapped her hand in fresh bandages, and though the swelling had gone down slightly, the fingers were still motionless and clearly painful. Let me help, Caleb said, taking the knife from her good hand before she could protest. What needs cutting? Potatoes. And onions for the hash. She directed him with the ease of someone used to managing a kitchen, and soon they had a rhythm going, Caleb chopping, Martha frying, both of them working in the warm bubble of the kitchen while the cold world pressed against the windows. Jacob Pierce came in from the barn, stomping snow from his boots. Morning. Wanted to thank you again for letting us stay. The girls slept better than they have in weeks. Where are you headed? Martha asked. If you don't mind my asking. Montana, eventually. My wife's brother has land up there. Said there's work if we can get to him. Jacob's expression showed how unlikely he thought that was. But we're low on supplies, and with this weather, he didn't finish, but he didn't need to. Winter travel was deadly even for the prepared. For a family with 2 small children and almost nothing to their name, it was nearly suicidal. Martha and Caleb exchanged glances. Then Martha said, Stay. Ma'am? Stay here. At least until the weather breaks. We've got the barn, we've got food, and we could use another hand. Can't pay much, can't pay anything really, but you'd be fed and sheltered. She looked at Caleb. If that's all right with the owner. More than all right, Caleb said immediately. We'd be grateful for the help, and your daughters can stay warm instead of risking the road. Jacob's throat worked. I'm not a charity case. Nobody said you were. This is a trade. Your labor for room and board. Fair deal, seems to me. Caleb extended his hand. What do you say? After a long moment, Jacob shook it. The grip was firm, the hand calloused from hard work. Thank you. You won't regret this. I know. Breakfast was rowdy that morning, the addition of the Pierce family changing the atmosphere in subtle ways. The little girls sat between Sam and Garrett, both men competing to see who could make them laugh harder with silly faces and exaggerated stories. Mrs. Pierce, her name was Anna, they learned, helped Martha serve, and the two women moved together like they'd been doing it for years. Wade watched it all with an expression that was hard to read. When breakfast ended and the men prepared to head out to their duties, he pulled Caleb aside. Word's going to spread that we're taking in families now. Could have more showing up looking for the same deal. Would that be so bad? Depends on whether we can feed them. Wade's tone was practical, not judgmental. Just want to make sure you've thought it through. I haven't, Caleb admitted. I'm making this up as I go, but it feels right. Right doesn't always mean possible. No, but it means something. Caleb clapped the foreman on the shoulder. Keep an eye out today. Our friend might be bolder after his little visit last night. The day progressed in cautious normalcy. The crew went about their work, but every man kept a rifle close and eyes scanning the tree line. Jacob proved himself useful immediately, helping Sam repair a section of fence that had been damaged by the fire and working with a steady competence that earned quiet respect. By afternoon, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. The light on the snow was blinding, turning the ranch into a landscape of white and shadow. Caleb was in the barn, checking on a mare who'd been favoring her front leg when he heard horses approaching, multiple horses, moving fast. His hand went to the rifle leaning against the stall. Through the barn door, he could see riders cresting the hill to the east, 4 of them coming hard. For a moment, his heart hammered with fear. Was this it? The attack? But as they drew closer, he recognized the lead rider. It was Doc Morrison, the physician from town, and behind him rode 3 other men Caleb knew by sight, merchants and townspeople. He met them in the yard, Wade and several crew members materializing from various buildings, all armed. Doc Morrison pulled up his horse, breathing hard. He was a small man in his 50s, with wire-rimmed spectacles and a perpetually worried expression that right now looked justified. Caleb Turner? Thank the heavens you're all right. We heard about the fire, heard there was trouble out here. News travels fast. It does when a man rides into town ranting about burning out ranchers and redistributing wealth. The doctor dismounted, his legs unsteady. Fellow with a scar on his face, riding a gray horse. He spent half the night in the saloon, drinking and talking about how the wealthy needed to be taught a lesson, how Turner Ranch was just the start. One of the other men, a shopkeeper named Harris, spoke up. He gathered a following, Mr. Turner. Angry men, desperate men. Some of them lost their homesteads last year to drought and debt. They're hurting and looking for someone to blame. How many? Wade asked sharply. Maybe a dozen by the time they rode out this morning. Could be more by now. They're spreading the word, looking for anyone with a grudge against ranchers or banks. Harris looked genuinely distressed. We came to warn you. Some of us might not always agree with how things are run out here, but we don't hold with mob violence. Caleb felt the situation shifting, the pieces rearranging into a picture he didn't like. A dozen men, possibly more, united by anger and hardship and a charismatic leader with a scar. Desperate people were dangerous people, and when you gave them a target and called it justice, there was no telling what they might do. Thank you for the warning, he said. All of you. Riding out here was brave. What will you do? Doc Morrison asked. Defend what's mine, and hope it doesn't come to bloodshed. There might be another way. This from Martha, who'd emerged from the house wrapped in a shawl. If these men are truly desperate, truly hungry, then violence isn't what they need. They need help. With respect, ma'am, they're past help, Harris said. They're looking for revenge. Then we don't give them a target to revenge themselves on. Martha's eyes were bright with an idea that was either brilliant or insane. What if instead of waiting for them to attack, we invite them here? Feed them, talk to them, show them we're not the enemy? The suggestion landed like a bomb. Every man there looked at her like she'd lost her mind. That's suicide, Wade said flatly. Or it's diffusion. Martha turned to Caleb. These men are being told a story. That ranchers are greedy, that you're hoarding resources while others starve. What if we show them a different story? What if we show them that this place is struggling too, that we're doing the best we can, and that we're willing to share what little we have? They'll rob us blind, someone muttered. Maybe, Martha conceded, or maybe they'll see that violence isn't the answer, that we're all in this together, all trying to survive the same hard winter. Caleb looked at the faces around him, skeptical, afraid, but also listening. He thought about the crossroads Martha had described, the choice between fear and something else. Every instinct screamed that this was foolish, that you didn't invite wolves into the sheepfold and hope they'd become vegetarian. But then he thought about Jacob Pierce and his daughters, about the way fear had nearly made them turn away a family that had done nothing wrong. He thought about Wade's broken certainty, about Sam's quiet wisdom, about Martha's steady belief that kindness mattered even when, especially when, it was hardest. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll try it your way." The reaction was immediate and loud. Wade looked like he wanted to throttle someone. Several of the crew members protested. Even Doc Morrison seemed dubious. But Caleb raised his hand for silence. "Here's what we're going to do. We're going to prepare food, a lot of it. We're going to set up in the barn where there's space, and we're going to send word that Turner Ranch is offering a meal and conversation to anyone who comes peacefully. No weapons, no threats, just people talking to people. And if they come armed anyway," Wade demanded, "then we defend ourselves, but we give them the chance to choose different first." The debate raged for another hour, but in the end, Caleb's word was law. The crew set to work with resigned determination, some of them clearly thinking their boss had lost his mind, others intrigued despite themselves by the audacity of it. Martha supervised the cooking with fierce focus, directing Anna Pierce and even recruiting some of the crew to help. They'd serve stew, bread, coffee, simple food, but plentiful and hot. The barn was cleared and swept, hay bales arranged for seating, lanterns hung from the rafters. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, riders appeared on the horizon. Not attacking, not charging, but approaching with the wary caution of men who'd been promised something they didn't quite believe. The man with the scar rode at their head, his gray horse picking careful steps through the snow. Behind him came others, some mounted, some on foot, all of them bearing the marks of hard times. Thin faces, patched clothes, eyes that held equal parts hope and suspicion. Caleb walked out to meet them, hands visible and empty. His heart hammered against his ribs, but he kept his voice steady. "You're welcome here if you come in peace. We've got hot food and a warm place to sit. All we ask is that you leave weapons outside and give talking a chance before violence." The scarred man stared at him for a long moment. Up close, the scar was vicious, a pale line that twisted from ear to jaw, pulling his face into a permanent partial sneer. His eyes were hard as creek stones. "This a trick?" "No trick, just an offer. You said the hungry don't forget. I'm offering to feed you." The scarred man's question hung in the frozen air between them. Behind him, the ragged group shifted and murmured, men who looked like they'd been carved from desperation and winter cold. Caleb could feel Wade's tension radiating from the porch where the foreman stood with a rifle held low but ready. The entire ranch seemed to hold its breath. "No trick," Caleb repeated, his voice carrying across the snow. "You're hungry, angry, and someone's told you that places like this are your enemy. I'm offering you a chance to see for yourself whether that's true. Food's getting cold while we stand here talking about it." The scarred man's eyes narrowed, calculating. His horse stamped, breath steaming in the dying light. Finally, he dismounted with slow deliberation. "Name's Silas Cord, and you're right about one thing. I am hungry. Been hungry for 2 years, ever since the bank took my land and left my family with nothing." He unbuckled his gun belt, held it up where everyone could see, then laid it carefully across his saddle. "But I'm not a fool. Your men stay armed, mine stay armed." "Fair enough," Caleb said, though Wade made a sound of protest behind him. "But the guns stay holstered unless someone draws first. We eat, we talk, and then everyone goes home alive. That work for you?" Silas Cord smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. "We'll see." The group followed Caleb toward the barn, a procession of broken men and a few women who looked even harder than their companions. Caleb counted 14 in total, though more might be hanging back in the trees. As they approached, he could see Martha standing in the barn entrance, her bandaged hand visible against her dark dress, her expression calm as Sunday morning. Inside, the barn had been transformed. Long tables made from planks and sawhorses ran down the center, covered with clean cloth. The lanterns cast warm circles of light that pushed back the shadows, and the smell of beef stew was so rich it made Caleb's own stomach growl despite his fear. Martha had outdone herself. There were loaves of bread, pots of stew, coffee in large kettles, even some of the precious sugar cookies arranged on tin plates. The ragged group filed in slowly, eyes wide with suspicion and hunger warring on their faces. They took seats with the wary caution of stray dogs, ready to bolt or bite depending on which survival instinct screamed louder. Martha moved among them with Anna Pierce at her side, ladling stew into bowls, pouring coffee, setting bread within reach. She worked with her good hand and sheer determination, ignoring the pain that tightened her face whenever she forgot and tried to use the broken one. "Eat," she said simply. "There's plenty, and it's not getting any warmer." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then a young man at the end of the table, he couldn't have been more than 19, with hollow cheeks and eyes that had seen too much, picked up his spoon and took a bite. His eyes closed. A sound escaped him that was half moan, half sob. That broke the dam. Suddenly everyone was eating, not with manners, but with the desperate efficiency of people who'd learned not to waste a meal because the next one wasn't guaranteed. The silence was broken only by the scrape of spoons against bowls, the tear of bread, the grateful slurp of hot coffee. Caleb sat down across from Silas Cord, who ate more slowly than the others, but with no less intensity. Wade positioned himself near the door, his expression suggesting he thought this was the stupidest thing he'd ever witnessed. The rest of the crew spread out along the walls, armed and watchful. "You know what you are?" Silas said after his third spoonful, not looking up from his bowl. "You're either the most generous man in Wyoming territory or the most calculating. Haven't decided which yet." "Does it matter? You're eating either way." "It matters." Silas finally met his eyes. "Generous men are fools who get themselves killed. Calculating men are dangerous. I need to know which kind of enemy you are." "I'm not your enemy." "You're a rancher. You own land. That makes you my enemy by definition." Silas gestured around the barn with his spoon. "You sit here with cattle and buildings and supplies while people starve in the cold. You tell me how that's not the problem." "Because I'm drowning too." Caleb leaned forward. "You want to know the truth? This ranch is about 3 months from foreclosure. My father died and left me $5,000 in debt. The bank wants payment by April, and I don't have a prayer of making it. So yeah, I've got buildings and land, but I've also got a noose around my neck that's tightening every day." Silas studied him, trying to determine if this was truth or performance. "Then why feed us? Why not hoard what you've got?" "Because what's the point of surviving if you have to become something ugly to do it?" Caleb glanced at Martha, who was refilling coffee cups with quiet efficiency. "That woman there taught me that the only wealth that matters is what you give away. Everything else can be taken. And you know what? She's right. I can lose this ranch being generous, or I can lose it being a miser. At least the first way I can still look at myself in the mirror." A woman 3 seats down spoke up, her voice rough from cold and disuse. Pretty words from a man who's never missed a meal. "You're right," Caleb said, turning to face her. "I've been lucky. Born into this place, never had to wonder where my next meal was coming from. Until my father died and I saw the books and realized we'd been living on borrowed time for years. So no, I haven't starved. But I'm learning what it feels like to watch everything fall apart despite your best efforts." The woman's expression didn't soften, but something in her eyes shifted slightly. Recognition, maybe. The shared understanding of helplessness. Silas Cord set down his spoon, the bowl empty. "I had a farm. 40 acres in Nebraska. Not much, but it was mine. Worked that land for 12 years with my wife and 3 sons. Then the drought came. Lost 2 harvests in a row. Banks said they'd work with me, said they understood times were hard. Then one morning a man showed up with papers saying I had a week to pay or get out. His voice was flat, emotionless, which somehow made it worse. I begged, I pleaded. I offered them everything I had. They took it and threw us out anyway. My wife died that first winter. Pneumonia. Couldn't afford a doctor." The barn had gone quiet. Even the men who'd been eating had stopped, listening. "I'm sorry," Caleb said, and meant it. Sorry doesn't bring her back. Sorry doesn't give my sons a future. Silas's hands curled into fists on the table. I spent a year wandering, looking for work, trying to figure out how the world could be so cruel. Then I met others like me. Other men who'd lost everything to banks and drought and the simple arithmetic of survival. And we realized something. The system that crushed us was built by people like you, ranchers, landowners, men who had power and used it to keep the rest of us down. That's not fair, Wade interjected from his position by the door. Mr. Turner's father worked himself to death trying to keep this place running. He wasn't out there crushing anybody. Wasn't he? Silas turned his attention to the foreman. Did he ever help anyone who couldn't pay him back? Did he ever share his good fortune when others were struggling? Or did he keep to his own and let the rest of the world burn? Wade's jaw worked, but he had no answer. Because the truth was complicated and uncomfortable and not easily defended. Martha set down the coffee pot and moved to stand beside Caleb. Her bandaged hand rested on the table like evidence. "You're right to be angry," she said quietly. "The world is cruel and unfair, and it breaks people without mercy. I lost my husband and daughter to fever, lost everything I owned trying to save them, spent years wandering just like you, looking for meaning in a world that seemed designed to cause suffering." "Then you understand," Silas said. "I understand anger. I understand the desire for revenge, for someone to pay for all the pain." Martha's voice was steady. "But I also learned that anger is a fire that burns the person carrying it more than anyone else. You can feed it until it consumes you, or you can choose something different." "What? Forgiveness?" Silas's laugh was bitter. "You want me to forgive the banks, the drought, the system that killed my wife?" "No, I want you to stop letting it kill you too." Martha pulled out a chair and sat down, her gray eyes meeting his without flinching. "Revenge won't bring her back. Burning down ranches won't give your sons a future. All it does is perpetuate the cycle of cruelty. Someone hurt you, so you hurt someone else, and they hurt another, and on until the whole world is bleeding." "So what do you suggest? That we just accept it, lie down and die quietly?" "I suggest you fight for something instead of against something," Martha gestured around the barn. "Every person here is struggling. The men who work this ranch are one paycheck from poverty. Mr. Turner is fighting debt that will destroy him. You and your companions have lost everything. We're all victims of the same hard times. The question is whether we turn on each other or find a way to help each other survive." A man who hadn't spoken yet, older and weathered like dried leather, cleared his throat. "That's a nice thought, ma'am. But we can't eat nice thoughts. We need real solutions." "Then let's talk about real solutions," Caleb said. "Instead of violence and revenge, what if we work together? This ranch has land, buildings, some resources. You have labor, skills, desperation that could be channeled into something productive. What if we figured out a way to make that work for everyone?" Silas leaned back, his expression skeptical. "You're suggesting what? That we all hold hands and sing songs while the bank takes your land and winter kills the rest of us? I'm suggesting we stop thinking about survival as something we do alone, that we pool what we have and face the problems together." Caleb knew he was making this up as he went, that the idea was half-formed at best, but something about it felt right. You need food and shelter. This place needs labor to keep running, to maybe find a way to pay down some of the debt. What if we made a trade? "You'd take us in? All of us?" The young man who'd eaten first spoke up, his voice cracking with hope and disbelief. "I don't know. Maybe. I need to think about the logistics, about whether it's even possible." Caleb looked at Wade, who looked like he'd swallowed something sour. "But I'm willing to try if you're willing to stop treating this place like the enemy." Silas Cord studied him for a long time. The barn was silent except for the crackle of lantern flames and the soft breath of too many people in too small a space. Finally, he said, "You're either the bravest fool I've ever met, or you've got an angle I haven't figured out yet." "No angle. Just trying to find a third option between dying alone or killing each other." "There's always a third option," Martha added. "People just usually don't look for it because the other two are easier to understand." The older man who'd spoken earlier nodded slowly. "I was a carpenter before I lost my shop. If this place needs repairs, I can do that. Better than burning it down, I suppose. Others began speaking up, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. A woman who'd worked as a cook, a man who knew blacksmithing, another who'd been a farmhand before the drought. They were offering their skills like cards laid on a table, testing whether this improbable gamble might actually work. But not everyone was convinced. A younger man near Silas, with angry eyes and a jaw that looked like it had been broken and healed wrong, stood abruptly. "This is nonsense. We came here for justice, not charity. This rancher's just trying to trick us into being his slaves." "Sit down, Marcus," Silas said tiredly. "No. You sit here and listen to his lies, but I know better. They're all the same, these landowners, these rich men. They'll use you up and throw you away." Marcus pointed at Caleb with a shaking hand. "You want to know what his father did to me? I worked this ranch 5 years ago, broke my back for him. Then I got hurt, horse threw me, crushed my shoulder, could barely lift my arm. He paid me a week's wages and sent me packing. No doctor, no help, nothing, just gone." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Caleb felt the weight of it, the truth he couldn't deny. "I don't remember you," he said quietly, "but I believe you. And I'm sorry that happened." "Sorry, there's that word again." Marcus's voice cracked. "Sorry doesn't fix my shoulder. Sorry doesn't give me back those years I spent begging for work nobody would give me because I couldn't use my arm right." "You're right, it doesn't." Caleb stood slowly, moving around the table to face Marcus directly. "My father made a lot of choices I'm not proud of. He was hard, practical, and he believed in protecting his own above all else. That meant he didn't help people like you when maybe he should have. And I can't fix that. I can't change the past. But I can try to do better going forward." "How?" "By offering us scraps and calling it generosity? By offering you work, dignity, and a place to survive the winter. By treating you like human beings instead of problems to be solved or enemies to be fought." Caleb's voice was steady despite the fear crawling up his spine. "You want revenge on my father? You can't have it. He's dead. You want revenge on me? I'm right here, but I'm also offering you something better. The choice is yours." Marcus stared at him, breathing hard, his good hand clenched into a fist. For a moment it seemed like he might swing, might let all that anger and pain explode into violence. Then his shoulders sagged. "I don't want revenge," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just want to stop hurting." "Then let's try to make that happen." Caleb extended his hand. "I can't promise miracles. This ranch is failing and I'm barely holding on. But if you're willing to work, I'm willing to share what I've got for as long as it lasts." Marcus looked at the offered hand like it might be a snake. Then, slowly, he reached out and shook it. His grip was weak on the right side, the damaged shoulder limiting his strength, but the gesture was enough. The tension in the barn broke like ice cracking on a spring river. People began talking in low voices, the conversations overlapping and building into something that almost sounded like hope. Silas Cord watched it all with an expression Caleb couldn't read. "You understand what you're doing?" the scarred man said eventually. "You take in this many desperate people, it changes everything. You can't go back to what you were before." "I know. Some of these folks have done bad things to survive. Stolen, lied, maybe worse. You sure you want that kind of trouble?" "Are you trying to talk me out of this?" Caleb asked. Silas smiled, and this time there was something almost genuine in it. "Just making sure you know what you're signing up for. I didn't ride here planning to stay. Planned to make trouble, maybe burn something, send a message. But this," he gestured at the barn, the food, the people beginning to let their guard down. "This is more interesting, more dangerous too probably, but interesting. Does that mean you'll stay? Help make this work?" "I'll think about it." Silas stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "But I'll tell you this much. If you're lying, if this is some elaborate trap or trick, I will burn this place to the ground with you inside it. I've got nothing left to lose. Remember that." "Fair enough." The gathering continued for another hour. Martha and Anna kept the coffee flowing, and some of the ranch hands began talking with the newcomers. Tentative at first, but gradually finding common ground in shared hardships and small jokes. Wade remained stony and watchful, but even he couldn't completely hide his surprise when one of Silas's men helped Sam Hutchins carry wood for the stove without being asked. As the evening wore down and people began preparing to leave or find places to sleep in the barn, Doc Morrison approached Caleb. The physician had stayed quiet during the confrontation, but now his expression was troubled. "That was either brilliant or insane," he said quietly. "I'm not sure which." "Why not both?" "Because brilliant has a way of working out, and insane has a way of getting people killed." Morrison adjusted his spectacles. "You're taking a tremendous risk. These are desperate people." "So am I." "Not the same kind of desperate. You're trying to save a ranch. They're trying to survive. Those motivations don't always align." Caleb watched Martha helping the Pierce girls settle into a corner with blankets, her bandaged hand held carefully against her chest. "Maybe not. But what's the alternative? Turn them away and prove their worst beliefs about people like me? Let anger and fear turn this into a battlefield? The alternative is protecting what's yours, surviving to fight another day. Doc, I'm going to lose this ranch regardless. The debt's too deep, the odds too long. But how I lose it, whether I go down hoarding and suspicious or whether I go down trying to help people, that's something I can control. And it matters." Morrison sighed. "Your father would say you're a fool." "Probably. But my father's choices led to a mountain of debt and dying alone without telling his son the truth. So maybe being different isn't such a bad idea." The doctor had no answer to that. He bid Caleb good night and rode back toward town with the other merchants, their horses picking careful paths through the snow. The stars were emerging now, hard and bright in the frozen sky, and the temperature was dropping fast. By midnight, the barn was full of sleeping bodies. Silas and his group had accepted the offer to stay the night, though Caleb noticed they'd positioned themselves near the exits and several were clearly sleeping in shifts. Trust was still a scarce commodity, but it was a start. In the main house, Caleb sat with Wade and Martha around the kitchen table. The foreman had been silent since the gathering ended, his face carved from stone and frustration. "You're going to tell me this was a mistake," Caleb said. "No point. You wouldn't listen anyway." Wade poured himself coffee from the pot on the stove. "But I'll say this, we just went from barely sustainable to completely impossible. We couldn't feed the crew we had. Now we've got 14 more mouths, maybe more if word spreads, and winter's not close to over." "I know the math." "Do you? Because from where I sit, you just signed our death warrant out of some misguided idea about helping people." "But they were going to attack us," Martha pointed out quietly. "If Caleb had turned them away, they would have come back with violence. At least this way we have a chance." "Chance at what? Starving together instead of separately?" Wade's voice rose. "I've been running this ranch for 15 years. I know what it takes to survive a winter, and this isn't it. This is suicide dressed up as charity." "Then leave." Caleb met the foreman's eyes. "I mean it, Wade. If you think this is hopeless, if you can't support what I'm trying to do, then take your wages and go. I won't hold it against you." Wade's jaw worked. "You'd like that, wouldn't you? Get rid of the one person telling you the truth." "The truth is we're all drowning. The question is whether we drown alone or together, whether we spend our last weeks fighting over scraps or trying to build something that means more than survival." Caleb's voice was tired but firm. "I'm not asking you to like it. I'm asking you to help me make it work." The silence stretched between them, thick with tension and unspoken history. Finally, Wade set down his cup with deliberate care. "Your father trusted me to keep this place running, to protect his legacy. That's what I'm trying to do." "My father's legacy is debt and secrets and a ranch held together by stubbornness. Maybe it's time for a different legacy. Or maybe you're too young to understand that good intentions don't pay the bank. Probably. But I'd rather fail trying to do right than succeed at being cruel." Caleb stood, his body aching with exhaustion. "We'll figure out the logistics in the morning, food inventory, work assignments, how to stretch what we have. But tonight, I'm too tired to argue. You coming to the planning meeting or not?" Wade stared at him for a long moment. Then, grudgingly, he nodded. "I'll be there. Somebody has to keep you from getting everyone killed with your optimism." After Wade left, Martha began banking the fire in the stove. Caleb helped her, and they worked in comfortable silence until the kitchen was secure for the night. "You handled that well," Martha said eventually. "Didn't feel like it." Because it's hard. Leadership always is. She paused, looking at him with those steady gray eyes. You're trying to do something that most people would say is impossible. Trying to bridge the gap between enemies, trying to build community out of desperation. It won't be easy. I know. But it might be worth it. She smiled slightly. Get some sleep. Tomorrow the real work begins. Caleb climbed the stairs to his room, a small space under the eaves that still held some of his childhood things. A wooden horse his grandfather had carved, books he'd read until the pages fell apart, the smell of old wood and memory. He lay in bed listening to the house settle, to the wind outside, to the distant sound of movement from the barn where 14 desperate people were sleeping in the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, this rancher meant what he said. He thought about his father, about the choices that had led to this moment, about Martha's broken hand and Wade's fear and Silas Cord's scarred face, about the Pierce girls sleeping safely for the first time in weeks, about the impossible mathematics of feeding people with resources that were already too thin. Sleep didn't come easy, but when it finally arrived, Caleb dreamed not of failure, but of possibility, of a barn full of people working together, of laughter instead of anger, of a winter survived not through hoarding, but through the radical, dangerous act of sharing. Whether it was a prophetic dream or a beautiful delusion, morning would tell. And morning was coming fast, bringing with it all the challenges and impossibilities of turning vision into reality. But for now, in the dark hours before dawn, hope was enough. Fragile and uncertain, but enough. Dawn came with the kind of cold that made breathing painful, the kind that turned exhaled breath into ice crystals before it could dissipate. Caleb woke to the sound of movement below. Boots on wooden floors, the clatter of the stove being stoked, voices low and uncertain. He dressed quickly, the room so cold his fingers fumbled with buttons, and descended to find the kitchen already full of people. Martha stood at the stove despite the early hour, her bandaged hand tucked against her side while she directed Anna Pierce and two other women he didn't recognize. They worked with the focused efficiency of people who understood that breakfast for 30 required organization and speed. The smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the air, almost offensive in its richness. Wade sat at the table with a ledger open in front of him, his expression suggesting he'd been up for hours doing calculations that only confirmed his worst fears. Silas Cord leaned against the far wall, watching everything with those hard creekstone eyes, and several of his people clustered near the door like they hadn't quite committed to staying. "Morning," Caleb said, accepting the coffee cup Martha pressed into his hands. The heat of it was a blessing. "We've got a problem," Wade said without preamble. "Actually, we've got about 12 problems, but I'll start with the biggest one. Food." He turned the ledger around so Caleb could see the numbers. The columns of figures were damning in their simplicity. With the original crew of 7 plus Martha, they'd had supplies for roughly 6 more weeks if they were careful. Add Jacob Pierce's family, and that dropped to 5 weeks. Add Silas's group of 14, and they were looking at 3 weeks, maybe less. "That's assuming normal consumption," Wade continued. "If we're asking people to do heavy labor, repairs, fence work, anything physical, they'll need more food, not less. We could be looking at 2 weeks before we're completely out." "Then we ration harder," Caleb said, though his stomach turned at the thought. "We're already rationing. You want to go below subsistence levels? Because that's what you're talking about." Wade's finger tapped the ledger. 3/4 rations might buy us another week, but it'll leave everyone too weak to work. Half rations and people start dying. Silas pushed off from the wall. "So you're saying you can't actually help us? That this whole generous offer was built on nothing?" "I'm saying we need solutions beyond what we have in the pantry right now." Caleb looked around the crowded kitchen. "Anyone here good at hunting? Trapping?" A man near the door raised his hand tentatively. He was thin and weathered, with a beard that needed trimming and eyes that suggested competence beneath the desperation. "I can trap. Used to run lines in Montana before the drought pushed me south." "What's your name?" "Elijah. Elijah Moss." "All right, Elijah. Take whoever you need and set trap lines. Rabbit, squirrel, anything edible. We've got wire and equipment in the storage shed." Caleb turned to another man, the older carpenter who'd spoken up last night. "You said you could work wood. We need ice fishing equipment. Tip-ups, shelters. The creek's frozen solid, but there's trout under that ice if we can get to them. The carpenter nodded slowly. I'll need materials. Saw, drill, some canvas if you've got it. Take what you need from the workshop. Anyone here know how to fish through ice? Sam Hutchins cleared his throat from where he sat nursing his own coffee. I've done it. Not pretty work in this cold, but it's effective if you know what you're doing. Then you're in charge of the fishing operation. Take whoever you need. Caleb's mind was racing now, assembling pieces of a plan that was more desperation than strategy. What about the cattle? Can we slaughter one? Wade's expression darkened. Those cattle are our future. We sell them in spring to pay the debt. You start slaughtering them for food, and we lose what little chance we have of satisfying the bank. The bank gets nothing if we're all dead from starvation. The bank gets this entire ranch if we default. Everything. Land, buildings, equipment, the remaining cattle. At least if we keep the herd intact, we might be able to negotiate, might find a way to what? Caleb's voice rose despite his attempt to stay calm. Wade, we both know the numbers. Even with a perfect spring sale, we're still short by thousands. The bank's going to take this place regardless. The only question is whether we're alive to see it happen. The kitchen went silent. The women at the stove had stopped working, and everyone was watching the confrontation unfold with the terrible fascination of people watching a building collapse. Wade stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. Your father spent 30 years building that herd. 30 years of careful breeding, of weathering droughts and hard markets, of sacrificing everything to create something valuable. And you want to just butcher it away to feed strangers? I want to keep people alive. These aren't your people. They're... Wade stopped himself, but the damage was done. The implication hung in the air like poison. Silas Cord's voice cut through the tension, quiet but sharp as a blade. Go ahead. Finish that sentence. Tell us what we are. Wade's jaw worked, but no words came out. The shame on his face was genuine, which somehow made it worse. We're not strangers, Silas continued, taking a step forward. We're men and women who worked our whole lives, who built things with our own hands, who believed that hard work and honesty would be enough. The only difference between us and you is that your catastrophe hasn't finished yet. Ours already did. That's not fair, Wade said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Fair? A woman spoke up from near the stove, her voice bitter. I lost 3 children to fever because I couldn't afford medicine. My husband walked away one morning looking for work and never came back. I've been surviving on scraps and charity for 2 years. You want to talk to me about fair? Others began sharing their stories, the words tumbling out like water through a broken dam. A man who'd lost his farm to a wildfire. A couple whose entire town had dried up and blown away when the railroad chose a different route. A young man who'd worked himself sick only to be cast aside the moment he became inconvenient. Each story was a small tragedy, and together they painted a picture of a world that chewed people up and spit them out with casual cruelty. Martha set down her spatula and turned to face the room, her bandaged hand visible against her apron. Enough, she said quietly, but with enough force that everyone stopped talking. We can stand here and compare suffering, or we can figure out how to survive. Your choice. The silence that followed was different than before. Less hostile, more contemplative. Finally, Jacob Pierce spoke from his position near the door, his daughters pressed against his legs. Slaughter 1 cow, the smallest one, if it makes you feel better. But feed these people. That's what matters. Wade looked at Jacob, then at the faces around the kitchen, then at Caleb. Something in his expression shifted, not acceptance exactly, but resignation. The heifer born last spring. She's the smallest of the breeding stock, and she's got a bad leg that'll probably never heal right. We slaughter her, we get maybe 400 pounds of meat. Properly preserved, that could stretch a couple of weeks. Then that's what we do. Caleb met the foreman's eyes. And we keep looking for other solutions. Hunting, fishing, foraging, anything that supplements what we have. And when that runs out, we'll figure something out. We always do. It wasn't confidence, and everyone in the room knew it, but sometimes the lie of certainty was better than the truth of despair. The rest of the morning was controlled chaos. Wade and Tom Kershaw took the heifer to the slaughter shed, a grim task neither of them relished. Elijah Moss organized a trapping party, taking 3 others with him and a collection of wire snares and steel traps from the equipment shed. Sam Hutchins and the carpenter, whose name turned out to be Henry Whitmore, began constructing ice fishing shelters from scrap wood and canvas. Caleb found himself working alongside Silas Cord, both of them hauling firewood from the woodpile to the various buildings. The work was hard and cold, and for a long time they labored in silence, their breath coming in clouds that froze on their beards. "You're going to lose this place," Silas said eventually, pausing to rest the axe he'd been using to split logs. "You know that, right?" "I know. But you're still going to try. Still going to burn through resources, feeding people who can't pay you back, helping people who'll forget your name the moment they move on." "Probably." Silas studied him with an expression that might have been respect or might have been pity. "Why? What's the point if you know it's doomed?" Caleb set down the log he'd been carrying and looked out across the ranch. In the distance, he could see people working, figures moving against the white landscape, dark shapes against the snow. The Pierce girls were helping Martha gather eggs from the chicken coop, their laughter carrying faintly on the wind. Henry Whitmore was measuring boards with careful precision, already deep into the construction of the fishing equipment. Even Marcus, the angry young man with the broken shoulder, was doing what he could with one arm, helping Anna Pierce organize the kitchen stores. "You asked me last night if I was generous or calculating," Caleb said. "Truth is, I'm neither. I'm just trying to figure out how to live with myself. My father built this place on hard choices and harder truths, and it left him alone and in debt, dying without anyone to help him understand the books. I don't want that. I don't want to spend my last days hoarding and suspicious, defending what little I have against people who are just as desperate as I am." "So you'd rather go down in flames being noble?" "I'd rather go down in flames being human." Caleb picked up another log. "Besides, who knows? Maybe we'll figure something out. Maybe there's a solution none of us can see yet because we're too busy protecting what we think is ours." Silas laughed, short and sharp. "You're either the biggest fool I've ever met, or you know something the rest of us don't." "Probably the fool option." They worked in silence for a while longer, the rhythm of the labor creating a kind of meditation. Then Silas said, "I need to tell you something. About the fire." Caleb's hand stilled on the axe handle. "I didn't set it," Silas continued, "but I know who did. Man named Coleman. Rides with us sometimes, but he's got a mean streak that makes me nervous. He thought burning your haystack would draw you out, make you weak, make the message stick." Silas met Caleb's eyes. "I told him not to, told him it was the wrong approach. But he didn't listen. Left the group yesterday morning, said he had business elsewhere." "Where is he now?" "Don't know, but he's got friends, and they're angry in a way that doesn't listen to reason. They might come back, might try to finish what they started. Wanted you to know so you're not caught off guard." The information settled over Caleb like a weight. "How many friends?" "Maybe 6 or 7. Hard to say. Men like that collect each other. Misery loves company and all that. But they're dangerous, not just desperate, but angry desperate. The kind that wants to hurt something just to feel like they have power." "Should I be worried about the people you brought here? Are they going to turn on us?" Silas considered this carefully. "Most of them just want what you're offering, food, shelter, a chance to survive. They're grateful, or as close to grateful as desperate people get. But a few are still on the fence, still wondering if you're playing some long game, if there's a catch they haven't spotted yet. You keep treating them fair, keep showing them this is real, they'll settle. But if Coleman comes back with his friends and causes trouble, all bets are off." "Understood. And thanks for the warning. Don't thank me yet. I'm still deciding if I trust you or if I'm just too tired to keep running." Silas picked up the axe again. "Ask me again in a week if we're both still alive." By afternoon, the ranch had transformed into something resembling organized industry. The slaughter was complete, and Martha had organized the women into a meat processing assembly. They worked in the cold storage shed, cutting and wrapping, salting and preserving, their hands raw from the work but their expressions focused. The heifer would feed them, but only if they were smart about rationing and preservation. Elijah and his trapping crew returned as the sun began its decline toward the western mountains. They'd set 30 snares and a dozen steel traps in a radius around the ranch, focusing on areas where Sam had spotted rabbit tracks and other signs of small game. It would take a day or two to know if the effort was successful, but it was something. Sam's ice fishing operation had produced more immediate results. By the time the sun was fully down, they'd pulled 16 trout from the creek, good-sized fish that Martha immediately set to work preparing for dinner. The catch wasn't enough to feed 30 people as a main course, but stretched with beans and the precious bread she continued to bake, it would make a meal. Dinner that night was served in the barn again, the long tables filling with people who were starting to look less like strangers and more like a community. The work had changed something. Shared labor created shared identity, and there was less suspicion in the conversations, more genuine interaction. The Pierce girls sat with some of Silas's people, telling stories about their journey that made the adults wince, but that they recounted with the resilience of children who'd learned early that life was hard. Martha moved among the tables with Anna, and Caleb noticed how the women worked together seamlessly now, anticipating each other's movements like they'd been doing this for years instead of days. Wade sat at the end of one table talking with Henry Whitmore about construction projects the ranch needed. The foreman's earlier hostility had softened into something more like cautious pragmatism. He still didn't agree with Caleb's choices, but he'd stopped fighting them openly. As people finished eating and began drifting toward their sleeping spaces, Caleb found himself standing outside the barn, watching stars emerge in the frozen sky. The temperature was dropping again, the kind of cold that made exposed skin burn and breath freeze in the lungs. Martha joined him, wrapped in a heavy shawl. Her bandaged hand was tucked inside the fabric, protected from the cold. Long day. They're all long days right now. True, but this one was productive. We're still alive, still together, and nobody's killed each other yet. That's something. Caleb smiled despite the exhaustion pulling at his bones. Your standards for success have gotten pretty low. My standards are realistic. Success isn't some grand achievement right now. It's making it through another day, keeping people fed, maintaining enough hope that we don't give up. She paused. Silas told me about Coleman and his friends, about the possibility they'll come back. Word travels fast. It's a small community now. Secrets don't keep well. Martha looked up at the stars, her breath clouding the air. You need to prepare for the possibility of violence. These men Silas described, they're not coming to talk. I know. Do you? Because I've seen violence, Caleb. I've seen what it does to people, how it changes them. Once you cross that line, once you've hurt someone or killed someone, you don't come back the same. Then what do you suggest, that we just let them burn us out? Let them take everything? No. I suggest you understand what you're defending, because it's not just buildings and land anymore. It's people. All these desperate souls who've put their faith in your promise of something better. Martha's voice was quiet but intense. You defend them with everything you have. But you remember what you're fighting for, and you don't let the fight make you into something you're not. Before Caleb could respond, a shout came from the direction of the road. Both of them turned to see a rider approaching fast, the horse's hooves throwing up snow. As the figure drew closer, Caleb recognized one of the townspeople who'd come with Doc Morrison the day before, a young man named Peter who worked at the general store. The rider pulled up hard, the horse breathing heavy and showing white around its eyes. Mr. Turner, thank God I found you. Coleman and his men, they're in town. They're planning something for tomorrow night. They've been drinking and talking loud about justice and making examples. The sheriff tried to calm them down, but there's only one of him, and they're not listening. How many? Wade had emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. 8 that I counted, maybe more. They've got guns, and they're talking about riding out here at sunset tomorrow. Said something about fire-purifying greed, about showing the whole territory that the old ways are over. The news settled over them like a shroud. 8 men, armed and angry and fueled by alcohol and ideology. Against what? Caleb did a quick mental count. 7 original crew members, Silas's group of 14, though several were women, and a few were too old or injured to fight effectively, Jacob Pierce and himself. Maybe 15 people who could actually defend the ranch if it came to that, and half of them had no real experience with violence. We could leave, someone suggested from behind them. Caleb turned to see several of Silas's people gathered at the barn entrance, listening. Pack up what we can carry and scatter. They can't burn an empty ranch. They can burn it whether it's empty or not, Silas said, his voice hard. And then they'll just find another target, another place to make their point. Running doesn't solve anything. Neither does dying. Enough. Caleb's voice cut through the rising panic. We're not running and we're not dying. We're going to prepare. We're going to defend what's ours, and we're going to do it smart. With what? Marcus asked, his damaged shoulder making his posture uneven. We've got maybe a dozen rifles between us, half of them old as dirt. These men are coming with numbers and weapons and nothing to lose. Then we make sure we have something they don't, Martha said quietly. We have a plan. We have knowledge of this land, and we have something worth fighting for. Wade was already moving, his tactical mind taking over. We need to fortify the buildings. Board up windows where we can, create firing positions that give us cover and sight lines. Move all the women and children to the root cellar. It's stone, defendable, with only one entrance. Set up a water brigade in case they try to burn us out. And we need to decide right now who can shoot and who can't, because we don't have ammunition to waste on people who'll panic and miss. The planning continued late into the night. The barn transformed from a dining hall into a war room, with Wade and Silas working together to organize the defense. They sketched maps in the dirt, assigned positions, worked through scenarios with the grim efficiency of men who understood that preparation meant the difference between living and dying. Caleb watched it all with a growing sense of unreality. 3 days ago, he'd been a failing rancher trying to figure out how to pay impossible debt. Now he was preparing for a siege, for violence that might cost lives, for a confrontation that seemed to have spiraled far beyond his control. But as he looked around the barn at the faces illuminated by lantern light, determined, scared, but resolute, he understood something fundamental. This wasn't about the ranch anymore. It wasn't even about the debt, or the winter, or the immediate crisis. It was about whether a group of desperate people could come together and defend something good against people who wanted to tear it down. Martha found him as the meeting was breaking up, people moving to their assignments with quiet purpose. You should rest. Tomorrow's going to be hard. I can't sleep knowing what's coming. You need to try anyway. Leadership requires strength, and strength requires rest. She touched his arm with her good hand. This started with you trying to feed hungry people. Don't lose sight of that. Whatever happens tomorrow, you did the right thing. You chose compassion over fear. That matters. Even if it gets people killed, especially then. Because the alternative, becoming hard and cruel and selfish, that's a different kind of death. A slower one maybe, but just as final. She smiled sadly. Get some sleep, Caleb. The morning will come whether you're ready or not. He tried. He climbed the stairs to his room and lay in the darkness listening to the sounds of preparation below. Boards being nailed over windows, rifles being cleaned and loaded, low voices discussing strategy and possibility. The house creaked and settled around him, familiar sounds that had once meant safety, but now felt like the breathing of something fragile and temporary. Sleep came eventually, fitful and broken. He dreamed of fire and snow, of his father's disappointed face, of Martha's bandaged hand reaching for something he couldn't quite see. He dreamed of the Pierce girls laughing and then crying, of Silas Cord's scarred face smiling and then snarling, of Wade standing alone against an endless tide of angry men. He woke before dawn to find the house already stirring. Today was the day. Coleman and his men would come with sunset, and everything Caleb had tried to build, this fragile community of desperate people, this radical experiment in compassion over calculation, would be tested in fire and blood. The question was whether it would survive, and if it did, what it would become on the other side of violence. The answer was hours away. But those hours moved with the terrible inevitability of water flowing downhill, each minute bringing them closer to a confrontation that would define not just the ranch's future, but the very idea of what it meant to choose mercy in a world that demanded cruelty. The dawn that broke over Turner Ranch was deceptively beautiful. The sun emerged from behind the eastern mountains, painting the snow in shades of rose and gold, transforming the landscape into something from a painting rather than a battlefield. Caleb stood at the kitchen window watching the light spread across the valley and wondered if this would be the last sunrise he'd see from this house. Behind him, the kitchen was already full of activity. Martha directed the breakfast preparations with Anna and 2 other women, their movements quick and efficient despite the tension that hung in the air like smoke. The smell of coffee and fried potatoes filled the space, almost absurdly normal given what the day promised to bring. Wade entered through the back door, snow falling from his boots. Positions are set. Henry reinforced the barn doors with extra crossbeams. Sam and Elijah have rifles positioned in the hayloft with clear sightlines to the main approach. Tom and Cole are covering the east side from the bunkhouse windows. We're as ready as we're going to be. And the women and children? Root cellars stocked with water, food, blankets. It's cold as hell down there, but it's stone and defendable. Martha's going down with them once we spot riders approaching. I'm doing no such thing. Martha turned from the stove, her bandaged hand held against her chest, but her expression fierce. I can load rifles as well as anyone. Better than some, given I've been doing it longer than most of you have been alive. Martha, don't Martha me. This is my fight too. Those men are coming because we chose compassion over cruelty, because we fed hungry people instead of hoarding. I'm not hiding while others defend that choice. Her gray eyes were steel. Besides, Anna and the other women can manage the children just fine without me. They're mothers. Protecting young ones is what they do best. Wade looked at Caleb, who shrugged helplessly. Your call, boss. She stays, Caleb said finally. But she stays in the house where there's cover, not out in the open. Martha nodded, satisfied with this compromise. Fair enough. Now sit down and eat. You can't fight on an empty stomach, and I didn't cook all this food to watch it go cold. Breakfast was a solemn affair. People ate quickly, mechanically, fuel rather than enjoyment. The Pierce girls were already in the root cellar with Anna, and their absence made the kitchen feel hollow despite the crowd. Silas Cord sat at the table's end, methodically cleaning a rifle that looked older than he was, but well-maintained. Marcus was there too, his good arm steady as he loaded ammunition into his pockets, his face set with determination that masked the fear underneath. As they finished eating, the sound of hooves approached from the direction of town. Everyone tensed, hands moving to weapons. But it was Doc Morrison again, this time accompanied by Sheriff Warren Blackwood, a grizzled man in his 60s with a star pinned to his coat and a rifle across his saddle. Caleb met them in the yard. The sheriff dismounted stiffly, his breath clouding in the cold air. Turner, heard you've been expecting trouble. You heard right, Coleman and his men planning to ride out here at sunset. So young Peter told me. Came to see if I could talk some sense into you. Blackwood's expression was weary. This is foolishness, son. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting over what? The right to feed strangers? Let them come. Let them make their noise, and then let it be over. Nobody needs to die here. They're planning to burn us out, to kill people. You expect me to just let that happen? I expect you to be smart. You stand and fight, people will die. Maybe you, maybe some of these folks you've taken in, maybe Coleman's men. Blood spills, and then what? You think that solves anything? The sheriff's voice was tired. I've been keeping peace in this territory for 20 years. I know how these things go. Violence begets violence, and it never ends clean. Then arrest Coleman. Stop him before he gets here. On what charge? Making threats in a saloon? Half the men in this territory have done that at one point or another. I can't arrest a man for being angry and drunk. Blackwood shook his head. This is beyond my jurisdiction now. It's become something bigger than law, bigger than sense. It's become about pride and principle, and those are the things that get people killed. Caleb felt the weight of it pressing down on him. The sheriff was right. This had spiraled beyond any reasonable response. But backing down now felt like betraying everything he'd been trying to build, like admitting that compassion was only viable when it was convenient and safe. I appreciate you coming out here, Sheriff, but I'm not backing down. These people... He gestured toward the house where figures moved past windows, toward the barn where defenders waited in cold silence. They came here desperate and scared. I offered them something better than fear. I can't abandon that the moment it becomes dangerous. The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then sighed. Your father was a hard man, but he wasn't a fool. He'd have found a way to avoid this. My father is dead, and his way of doing things left this ranch drowning in debt and isolation. Maybe it's time for a different approach. Maybe. Or maybe you're about to learn why the old ways survived as long as they did. Blackwood mounted his horse with the careful movements of a man whose body hurt in a dozen places. I'll be in town if this goes south. Bring me the bodies and I'll write it up official. But I won't be party to this stupidity." He rode away, leaving Doc Morrison standing awkwardly in the yard. The physician looked torn, his face showing the internal debate of a man caught between duty and self-preservation. "I should go with him," Morrison said quietly. "But I'm a doctor. If there's shooting, there'll be wounded. I can't just leave." "We'd be grateful for your help," Caleb said. "Set up in the house. If anyone goes down, that's where we'll bring them." Morrison nodded and headed inside, already mentally organizing his limited medical supplies for the worst. The day crawled forward with agonizing slowness. Noon came and went. The defenders rotated through positions, trying to stay warm while maintaining vigilance. Caleb walked the perimeter with Wade, checking preparations, offering words of encouragement that felt hollow in his own mouth. "You know this is insane, right?" Wade said as they inspected the reinforced barn doors. "Even if we survive today, even if we drive them off, it doesn't solve anything. The debt's still there. The winner's still here. The bank still wants payment by April." "I know." "Then why? Why are we doing this?" Caleb looked out across the ranch, at the people moving through their defensive preparations, at the smoke rising from the kitchen chimney where Martha was probably already planning dinner for survivors who might not exist. Because some things matter more than survival. Because the kind of person I become facing this crisis is more important than whether I keep the ranch. Because if I'm going to lose everything anyway, I'd rather lose it being someone I can respect. Wade was quiet for a moment. Then, grudgingly, he said, "Your father would have hated that answer, but I think maybe I'm starting to understand it." They continued their inspection in silence, each man lost in his own thoughts about what the sunset would bring. By mid-afternoon, the waiting had become its own form of torture. People tried to stay busy, cleaning weapons, reinforcing positions, preparing ammunition, but the anxiety was palpable. Caleb found himself in the kitchen where Martha was rolling out biscuit dough with her one good hand, her movements practiced despite the handicap. "You should be in the cellar," he said for what felt like the 100th time. "And you should stop wasting breath on arguments you're not going to win." She didn't look up from her work. "Tell me something, Caleb. When did you decide that doing right mattered more than being safe?" "When you showed me there was a choice. Before that, I was just reacting, just trying to survive day by day. You gave me a different lens to see through." Martha paused in her work, her eyes distant with memory. "I told you I lost my husband and daughter. What I didn't tell you was how it happened. There was a fever running through our town. People were dying, and the wealthy families, the ones with means, they barricaded themselves away, refused to help, refused to share medicine, refused to even acknowledge the suffering happening just outside their windows." She resumed rolling the dough, her voice steady but weighted with old grief. "My husband was a doctor. He went out every day treating whoever needed help, using up our own supplies when the town ran out. He caught the fever, gave it to our daughter, and they both died within a week. I was angry for a long time. Angry at him for being selfless, angry at the wealthy for being selfish, angry at the world for being cruel. What changed? I realized that being angry at my husband meant wishing he'd been someone different, someone who could watch people suffer and turn away. And I didn't want that version of him. I wanted the man who saw need and responded, even when it cost him everything." She finally looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You remind me of him, that same stubborn belief that doing right matters even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Caleb felt his throat tighten. "I'm scared, Martha, not of dying exactly, but of getting other people killed, of being wrong about all of this." "Good. If you weren't scared, I'd worry about you. Fear means you understand the stakes, but you can't let it make your decisions for you." She wiped her good hand on her apron. "Whatever happens tonight, you gave these people hope. You showed them that not everyone in the world is cruel. That's worth something, even if it doesn't feel like enough." Before he could respond, a shout came from the barn. "Riders! Multiple riders approaching from the east!" The peaceful afternoon shattered like dropped glass. Caleb ran for the barn, his heart hammering against his ribs. By the time he reached Sam's position in the hayloft, he could see them, dark figures against the snow, coming fast and purposeful. He counted quickly. 8 riders, just as Peter had warned, spread out in a loose line. But something was wrong. They weren't charging, weren't showing the aggressive posture of men coming to fight. And as they drew closer, Caleb realized with a shock that he recognized several of them. They weren't Coleman's men at all. The lead rider pulled up in the yard, and Caleb saw it was one of the townspeople, a merchant named Hoskins, who ran the grain supply. Behind him were other familiar faces, farmers from surrounding homesteads, townspeople, even the blacksmith, a massive man named Carver, who rarely left his forge for anything. Hoskins dismounted, his expression grim but determined. "Turner, heard you might have trouble coming, thought you could use some help." Caleb stared, unable to process what he was seeing. Why would you? Because word spreads, son. Whole territory's been hearing about what you're doing out here. Taking in desperate folks, feeding strangers, standing up to men who think violence is the answer to everything. Hoskins gestured to the people behind him. Not everyone agrees with your methods. Hell, some of us think you're plumb crazy. But we also think Coleman and his thugs need to be stopped before this becomes something worse. Carver the blacksmith stepped forward, his arms as thick as fence posts. Plus, I owe you. Your father never charged me full price when times were hard. Figured it was time to settle that debt. More riders appeared on the horizon. Not 8, but 20, then 30. Farmers and merchants and townspeople, some armed with rifles, others carrying nothing but determination. They came in 2s and 3s, filling the yard with horses and humanity, transforming the quiet ranch into something alive with possibility. Wade appeared at Caleb's elbow, his expression stunned. Where the hell did all these people come from? Hope, Martha said softly from behind them. She'd come out despite the danger, her bandaged hand tucked into her shawl. They came from hope, the belief that sometimes people are better than their worst impulses. Silas Cord emerged from the barn, rifle in hand, staring at the crowd with something like wonder on his scarred face. I'll be damned, you actually did it. Did what? Built something worth fighting for, something bigger than yourself. Silas shook his head slowly. I've spent 2 years believing the world was nothing but cruelty and selfishness. That everyone was out for themselves and community was a lie we told to make the loneliness bearable. But this, he gestured at the gathered defenders, this is real. The sun was dropping toward the western mountains when the second group of riders appeared. This time it was Coleman and his men, approaching from the south with the aggressive swagger of people who thought they held all the power. They came expecting to find a small, scared group trying to defend the indefensible. Instead, they found something close to an army. Coleman pulled up short when he saw the crowd, his scarred face registering shock and then rage. What the hell is this? This is the community you thought didn't exist, Caleb called out, stepping forward. His voice was steady despite the adrenaline singing through his veins. You came here thinking you'd make an example of this ranch, show everyone that generosity was weakness. Instead, you're seeing something different. You're seeing what happens when people choose to stand together instead of tearing each other apart. These sheep don't scare me. Coleman's hand dropped to his gun. They'll scatter the moment real violence starts. Try it, Carver rumbled from his position near the barn. The blacksmith cracked his knuckles, a sound like small branches breaking. See what happens. Coleman's men were already looking uncertain. They'd come expecting an easy target, not this. The numerical advantage they'd counted on had evaporated, replaced by a situation where they were clearly outnumbered and outmatched. You can ride away, Caleb said. Nobody has to die here. Nobody has to prove anything. You've got anger and pain, and that's valid. But turning it into violence doesn't solve anything. It just creates more pain for everyone. You don't understand what they took from us, Coleman shouted. His horse stamped nervously, sensing his rider's agitation. The banks, the ranchers, the whole corrupt system, they destroyed our lives. We deserve justice. You deserve help, Martha said, moving to stand beside Caleb. Her voice carried across the yard, clear and strong. You deserve food and shelter and a chance to rebuild. And that's what this place is offering. Not to you specifically, Coleman, because you've made your choice clear, but to anyone who wants it, anyone willing to work, willing to be part of something better than anger. One of Coleman's men shifted in his saddle. Coleman, maybe we should... Shut up. Coleman's hand tightened on his reins. We came here to deliver a message, to show these comfortable people what real desperation looks like. And that's what we're going to do. He started to draw his gun. What happened next occurred so fast that Caleb almost missed it. Wade's rifle came up in one smooth motion. Sam shifted in the hayloft. A dozen weapons pointed at Coleman from different angles, the threat unmistakable. But it was Silas who moved fastest. He stepped forward, his own rifle pointed not at Coleman, but at the sky, his free hand raised in a gesture of peace. "Stop! Just stop!" Coleman's gun was half drawn, his expression twisted with rage and something else. Fear, maybe, or the terrible realization that he'd miscalculated badly. "I know what you're feeling," Silas said, his voice carrying the weight of lived experience. "I've been where you are. Lost everything, blamed everyone, thought violence was the only language left. I rode here yesterday planning to burn this place down. Wanted to hurt someone because I was hurting, wanted to make the pain stop by spreading it around. Then you understand. I understand you're about to throw your life away over nothing." Silas took another step forward. "These people aren't your enemy, Coleman. The system is broken, yes. The banks are cruel, yes. The world is unfair, absolutely. But this ranch?" He gestured around. "This place is trying to be different, trying to build something that doesn't run on fear and selfishness. And you can either join that, or you can die fighting against it. Your choice." The moment stretched, balanced on the edge of violence. Coleman's hand trembled on his gun. His men were watching him, waiting to see which direction this would go. The defenders were ready to fight if necessary, but there was no eagerness in their postures, just grim determination and the hope that somehow, impossibly, this could end without bloodshed. Finally, Coleman's shoulders sagged. The rage drained out of him like water from a broken vessel, leaving behind only exhaustion and grief. His gun slid back into its holster. "I'm so tired," he said, and his voice cracked. "I'm so tired of being angry, of fighting, of losing." "Then stop," Caleb said gently. "Just stop. Stay here. Work with us. Be part of building something instead of tearing things down." "You'd take me in? After everything?" "We'd take in anyone willing to choose different. That's the whole point." Caleb glanced at Martha, who nodded encouragement. "There's food in the barn. There's work that needs doing. There's a community here that's bigger than any one person's pain. All you have to do is say yes." Coleman sat his horse for a long moment, his scarred face working through emotions that had no easy names. Then slowly, he dismounted. His men followed suit, their weapons staying holstered, their postures shifting from aggressive to uncertain. "I don't know how to do this," Coleman admitted. "Don't know how to be anything other than angry." "None of us do," Silas said. "But we're learning together. That's the point." The tension broke like a fever. People began moving, talking, the terrible stillness of impending violence transforming into the ordinary chaos of too many people in one space. Martha immediately began organizing food distribution, recruiting helpers from the townspeople. Anna Pierce emerged from the root cellar with the children, and the Pierce girls ran to their father, who swept them up despite the weight of everything that had just happened. Caleb found himself surrounded by townspeople offering congratulations, asking how they could help, marveling at what had almost happened and what had actually happened instead. It was overwhelming and exhausting and strangely wonderful. Wade appeared at his side, his expression still showing shock. "I don't believe what I just saw." "Neither do I." "You realize this doesn't solve the fundamental problem, right? The debt's still there. The bank still wants payment. We've just delayed the inevitable." "Maybe. Or maybe we've built something that can survive what comes next." Caleb watched the crowd, defenders and would-be attackers mixing together, barriers breaking down over shared food and shared relief. Either way, we did it without becoming something ugly. That counts for something. The celebration, if it could be called that, continued into the evening. Martha's dinner preparations had somehow stretched to feed the massive crowd, though Caleb suspected it required miracles on par with the loaves and fishes. People ate standing up, sitting on hay bales, crowded into every available space. The barn was warm with body heat and lantern light, and the conversations had the slightly giddy quality of people who'd stared down violence and survived. As the crowd began to thin, townspeople heading home, some of Coleman's men accepting offers to stay, others choosing to move on, Caleb found himself alone on the porch of the main house. The stars were emerging, bright and cold and indifferent to human drama. Martha joined him, her shawl pulled tight against the chill. "Quite a day." "That's one way to put it." "You did good, Caleb. Better than good. You showed people that there's another way, that compassion isn't weakness and community isn't a fantasy. She paused. Your father would have been proud. Maybe not in the way you want, but in his own way. The bank's still going to take this place. Probably, but what you've built here, she gestured toward the barn where people were still talking, laughing, planning. That's not tied to the land. It's not something the bank can foreclose on. It's an idea, a way of being in the world. And ideas spread. As if summoned by her words, Hoskins, the grain merchant, appeared in the doorway. Turner, got a minute? They followed him inside to the kitchen where a dozen townspeople had gathered around the table. Carver, the blacksmith, was there, along with several farmers and even Doc Morrison. We've been talking, Hoskins said without preamble, about your situation. The debt, the bank, all of it. And we want to make you an offer. Caleb felt a flutter of something that might have been hope, but didn't dare name it. What kind of offer? We pool resources. Every person here contributes what they can, money, labor, goods. We approach the bank as a group, show them that this ranch has community backing, that it's not just you drowning alone, but a collective effort. Hoskins pulled out a ledger. I've done rough calculations. Between all of us, we could raise maybe $2,000. Not enough to clear the debt, but enough to show good faith, to negotiate. And in exchange? Wade asked suspiciously. Nobody does something like this for free. In exchange, this ranch becomes what it's already becoming, Carver said, a place that helps people, a supply center for families in need, a community hub. He shrugged his massive shoulders. My forge is doing well enough I don't need much, but knowing there's a place where desperate folks can get help, that's worth an investment. Others around the table nodded. A farmer spoke up, an older woman with weather-worn hands. My husband and I lost 2 sons to the war, never had grandchildren. We've got savings we were keeping for an old age that's already here. Rather see it do some good. One by one, they pledged amounts. $50 here, $100 there. Offers of labor and goods and expertise. The numbers added up slowly, painfully slowly, but they added up. By the time everyone had spoken, they'd committed to nearly $2,500 plus substantial in-kind contributions. Caleb felt his throat tighten. I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep doing what you've been doing, Hoskins replied. Say you'll keep this place open to people who need it. Say you'll prove that community means something in this godforsaken territory. I can do that. Then we have a deal. Hoskins extended his hand and Caleb shook it, feeling the calluses of a working man against his palm. One by one, the others shook hands too, sealing the agreement with nothing more formal than grip and word. After they'd gone, Caleb sat at the table with Wade and Martha, the ledger open in front of them. The numbers were still daunting. $2,500 wouldn't clear the debt, and there was no guarantee the bank would negotiate. But it was a chance, a real, tangible chance. It's not enough, Wade said, ever the pragmatist. We'd still need another miracle to make this work. Then we'll find another miracle, Caleb said, or we'll work so hard that we create one. Either way, we're not doing it alone anymore. The winter continued with its usual cruelty, but something had shifted. The ranch became what Caleb had envisioned in his most optimistic moments, a working community where everyone contributed and everyone was fed. Coleman and his men stayed, their anger slowly transforming into productive energy. Elijah's trap lines produced steady, small game. Sam's ice fishing operation became so efficient they were able to preserve fish for lean times. Henry Whitmore led construction projects that improved the buildings and created better shelter. Martha's hand healed slowly, the bones knitting crooked but functional. She never regained full use of her fingers, but she learned to work around the limitation, her determination making up for what her damaged hand could not do. The bank meeting came in late March, when the snow was finally beginning to recede and the first hints of spring were appearing in sheltered valleys. Caleb rode into town with Wade, Hoskins, and a delegation of townspeople. They carried ledgers showing the community investment, testimonials about the ranch's value, projections for the coming year. Horace Grimm, the banker, listened with his thin lips pressed into a line that suggested skepticism. But when Caleb finished the presentation, Grimm surprised them all. I've been hearing stories about Turner Ranch, he said slowly. about what you've been doing there. Taking in desperate people, feeding strangers, building some kind of commune. He paused. Sounds like socialism to me. Impractical. Unsustainable. Then foreclose, Caleb said, too tired to play games. Take the land, but you should know that every person in this room will make sure the territory knows what kind of bank punishes charity. Grimm's expression flickered. I didn't say I was foreclosing. I said it sounds impractical. He pulled out papers. But numbers don't lie, and your numbers have improved. Not enough to clear the debt, but enough to show progress. So here's what I'm willing to do. We restructure the loan. Longer term, lower payments. You keep the ranch, keep doing whatever it is you're doing, and you pay us back over 10 years instead of immediately. The relief was so intense it was almost painful. Caleb managed to keep his voice steady. What's the catch? The catch is you succeed or fail on your own merits. No more extensions, no more favors. You make the payments, or I take the land. But you get a fair chance. That's more than your father got, and more than most people in your situation deserve. Grimm slid the papers across the desk. Take it or leave it. Caleb took it. They all took it, signing papers and shaking hands and walking out of the bank into spring sunshine that felt like absolution. The ranch survived not just that winter, but many winters after. It became known throughout the territory as a place where desperate people could find help, where community mattered more than profit, where compassion wasn't a weakness, but a strength. Some years were harder than others. Some winters took people despite everyone's best efforts. But the fundamental truth remained. They faced it together. Silas Cord stayed on as foreman when Wade retired, his scarred face becoming a familiar sight to travelers who stumbled onto the ranch looking for aid. Coleman worked the trap lines and became one of the best hunters in the territory, his anger channeled into providing for the community he'd once tried to destroy. The Pierce girls grew up surrounded by people who'd chosen family over blood, and they carried that lesson into their own lives. Martha lived another 20 years, her broken hand a constant reminder of the night that changed everything. She never stopped cooking, never stopped believing that feeding people mattered, never stopped being the moral center around which the community revolved. When she finally passed, the funeral brought people from hundreds of miles away, people she'd fed, people she'd sheltered, people whose lives had been changed by an old woman who believed compassion was stronger than cruelty. Caleb never forgot the lesson of that terrible, beautiful winter, that the only wealth that mattered was what you gave away. That community was built not through strength but through vulnerability, not through hoarding but through sharing, that doing right was its own reward, even when, especially when, it cost everything. The ranch eventually passed to other hands, the debt finally paid off decades after it was incurred, but the legacy remained, a place where strangers became family, where fear was answered with food, where the radical belief that people were worth more than profit became not just an ideal but a lived reality. And it all started with an old woman with a broken hand who refused to stop cooking, who refused to let cruelty have the final word, who showed a young rancher that losing everything wasn't the worst thing that could happen. Losing your humanity was worse. On clear nights, when the stars were bright and the wind was quiet, you could still hear laughter from the barn where the community gathered. You could still smell bread baking in the kitchen where Martha's spirit lingered. You could still feel the warmth of people choosing, day after day, to be better than their worst impulses. The ranch survived because its people believed survival wasn't enough. They wanted to live, and they wanted to live in a world where mercy mattered, where generosity wasn't punished, where choosing compassion over calculation was possible. They built that world one meal at a time, one act of kindness at a time, one winter at a time. And though the world outside remained hard and often cruel, within the boundaries of Turner Ranch, something different flourished. Something that proved against all odds and conventional wisdom that another way was possible. That love could outlast fear, that community could overcome isolation, that broken things, hands, hearts, lives, could heal if given enough care and time. And that sometimes the greatest victory wasn't avoiding loss, but choosing how you faced it, with open hands instead of closed fists, with generosity instead of greed, with the stubborn, radical belief that feeding hungry people mattered more than protecting empty barns. Martha had been right all along. The only thing they truly owned was what they gave away. Everything else could be taken, but the choice to be kind, to be generous, to be human in the face of inhumanity, that was theirs forever. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.